Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Chapter 46, I haven't eaten in 10 days. Online, people were buzzing with all kinds of opinions. Meanwhile, over at Genesis Biotech, Nathan, the person in charge, was fuming, silently cursing to himself. Michael and his team are such useless idiots. Wiped out by zombies. Seriously? Couldn't even leave 1 or 2 survivors. But deep down, he knew the truth. Near the building, there was a powerful zombie king. Even the company's strongest awakener probably wouldn't stand a chance against it. It seemed the zombies were just stronger. To kill a phantom infected, it would take another, even more powerful zombie king. The zombie cultivation project has to continue. Ideally, we need to create phantom infected that we can control. Nathan thought to himself. He was fully aware that feeding zombies was like playing with fire, but for the sake of that immense power, he was willing to take the risk. Or, if the opportunity arises, maybe we could even cooperate with the zombie king. All it would take is providing them with some flesh and blood. I need to notify the rescue teams to speed up their search for survivors. Ethan, on the other hand, was still at home, completely unaware of Genesis Biotech's plans. Not that he cared. By now, everyone knew there was a powerful zombie king in the area near the building. It was extremely dangerous and had been declared no-go zone. Because of this, no one dared to disturb Ethan. In the past, helicopters would occasionally fly overhead, but now, even those had stopped. This area had become a zombie sanctuary. Ethan's life was incredibly comfortable. He had plenty of food and drink, consumed energy daily, and kept evolving. When he got bored, he'd watch TV or play video games. For him, the apocalypse felt more like a vacation. There wasn't a single thing to worry about. Shelter news. Our researchers have improved the survival rations. This high-fiber emergency food can be consumed in small amounts without causing stomach discomfort and can serve as a temporary hunger solution. The water purification system has been fully repaired. Please drink with confidence. There will no longer be large-scale outbreaks of parasites or viral infections. Tragic news. Our supply retrieval team was ambushed by an unknown group. If anyone has information, please report it immediately. The TV was broadcasting updates from the official shelter. It was clear they were in dire straits. They were down to eating emergency rations. Their water situation had been terrible, and now, even after finally finding some supplies, they'd been robbed by an unknown force. It was just pitiful. Ethan spared them a moment of sympathy, exactly 1 second, before turning back to his video game. At the edge of Ethan's territory, a small group of people was hiding inside a building. The place used to be a karaoke bar, a 3-story building. Now the doors and windows were all barricaded, leaving only a few small gaps to observe the outside. Shoo! Zombies are coming. Don't make a sound. A man crouched by the window, peeking through a crack to watch the street outside. Behind him, 2 others held their breath, not daring to make a noise. On the street outside, a massive figure lumbered along, swaying with every step. Behind it trailed a group of zombies. It was Bulldozer patrolling the area. Fortunately, Bulldozer's senses weren't very sharp, and it didn't notice the humans hiding inside the building. With its entourage of smaller zombies, it slowly moved away. Phew! The people inside let out a collective sigh of relief, finally able to relax a little. Good thing this brute-type zombie is dumb as a rock. Inside one of the private rooms of the karaoke bar, a few more people were lounging on the sofas. Thanks to the soundproofing of the KTV rooms, they didn't have to worry about the zombies outside being alerted. We're safe hiding here. No way the people from the official shelter will find us, said a bald, burly man. Yeah, boss, you're right. Even if they know we're here, they probably wouldn't dare come after us. This is the territory of a powerful zombie king. After all, another man chimed in. This group was none other than the infamous Black Hand Legion, the ones who had ambushed and stolen supplies from the official shelter. The Black Hand Legion had existed even before the apocalypse, operating in the shadows of the dark web. They were like a cult, worshiping the idea of absolute freedom, living without rules, doing whatever they wanted whenever they wanted. Back then, societal order kept them in check, preventing them from causing too much chaos. But when the apocalypse hit, it was like their dreams had come true. Your next chapter awaits on Empire. Those among them who awakened special abilities banded together, raiding supplies, killing survivors, and committing every atrocity imaginable. Ahaha! The apocalypse is our time to shine. The bald man's eyes gleamed with excitement. In the middle of the KTV room, 3 people were kneeling on the floor, their hands and feet tied together. Their mouths were stuffed with dirty rags, so all they could do was let out muffled groans of protest. These 3 were awakeners from the official shelter, tasked with transporting supplies. Unfortunately, they had been ambushed by the Black Hand Legion during their mission. "Boss, what do we do with these 3?" a wiry man asked. The bald man thought for a moment. "Keep them alive for now. They're our bargaining chips. If they die, we can feed their neurocores to the others, and their flesh can be used as food." Meanwhile, on the other side of Ethan's territory, another group of people had appeared. Leading the group was a young woman with large eyes, straight brown hair with bangs, and a strikingly beautiful face. But despite her beauty, there was a perpetual air of disdain for the world etched into her expression. This was Mia, the official shelter's number 001 awakener. Mia genuinely hated the world. She had grown up in an orphanage, only to later be confined to a mental institution. When she finally got out, she found herself in the middle of the apocalypse. With a life like that, who wouldn't hate the world? The only thing she could look back on fondly were the rare, warm memories from her time in the orphanage. Walking beside her was her partner, Sean, a man with a sharp, calculating gaze that gave him an air of intelligence. Gurgle, gurgle. Sean clutched his stomach, the intense hunger making him visibly uncomfortable. If not for the enhanced physique of an awakener, he might have already passed out from starvation. "When are we going to find some supplies? I haven't eaten in 10 days. Sean groaned. Sean, we've only been out here for 3 days, Mia replied flatly. Behind them were 4 other awakeners who had reached the neurocore stage. Their main job was to assist Mia and Sean, primarily by carrying supplies once they found them. Sean scratched his head, his clever eyes darting around. "Only 3 days? I'm so hungry, I can't even count anymore." "Like you could count in the first place," Mia shot back without even looking at him. The street ahead of them was desolate. Rusted, wrecked cars were piled up, some of them overgrown with moss. The surrounding buildings were in ruins, their shattered windows occasionally echoing with the distant growls of zombies. One of the Neurocore Awakeners, Chris, spoke up cautiously. "Up ahead is where the Genesis biotech team was wiped out. They say there's a strange and incredibly powerful zombie king in the area." Sean raised an eyebrow. "Oh, Chris, are the people who stole our supplies hiding in that area?" Chris nodded. "Based on the direction they retreated, there's a high chance they're somewhere in that zone." "Then let's go find them," Sean said casually, his recklessness on full display. Chris hesitated but nodded, adding a word of caution. "Remember, our main goal is to find supplies. Whatever you do, don't provoke the zombies here." The 6 of them moved forward cautiously, their bodies coated with a special ointment that masked their scent. As long as they didn't make any noise, they'd be fine. The zombies on the outskirts weren't densely packed, so as long as they avoided them, they wouldn't attract attention. From a distance, Chris spotted a few zombies standing in the middle of the street. They swayed unsteadily, their expressions blank and almost foolish. The group hugged the walls, moving slowly and quietly. Using abandoned vehicles as cover, they planned to circle around the zombies from behind. But just as they were halfway through, Sean's stomach suddenly let out a loud grumble. Chris and the others froze instantly, their expressions changing as their hearts leapt into their throats. The sound wasn't particularly loud, but zombies had unnaturally sharp hearing. The swaying zombies immediately stopped in their tracks. They stiffened, their heads tilting slightly as low growls rumbled from their throats. It was as if they were trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. Mia's sharp eyes narrowed as she prepared for a fight. The rest of the group crouched behind the wrecked cars, holding their breath. No one dared to make the slightest sound. Thankfully, after a tense moment, the zombies seemed to lose interest. They returned to their sluggish, swaying movements, their blank expressions back in place. Phew! Chris and the others exhaled in relief, quickly moving to bypass the dangerous area. Once they were far enough away, one of the awakeners muttered nervously, "Sean, you almost got us killed back there." "I was hungry, okay," Sean replied, completely unapologetic. Chris quickly stepped in to calm things down. "All right, let's focus on the mission. Once we find the supplies, there'll be food for everyone." Yeah, Sean grumbled, but the thought of food seemed to energize him. He started daydreaming about it, imagining the moment he'd sink his teeth into a piece of bread, washing it down with an ice-cold soda. Pure bliss. With that motivation, the group pressed on, moving carefully. So far, things are going relatively smoothly. They managed to avoid wave after wave of zombies. When necessary, they even climbed onto rooftops, moving across tiles like assassins straight out of Assassin's Creed. Still, Chris couldn't shake his unease. The deeper they ventured, the more dangerous it became. They were now in the heart of the area, where the zombies were more evolved and far more perceptive. According to the updated intel from Genesis Biotech, this area had been classified as a 5-star zombie nest. Woo woo woo. Suddenly, the sound of a woman crying echoed through the air. The wailing was sharp and eerie, rising and falling in pitch like a banshee's lament. It was the kind of sound that sent chills down your spine, as if it came straight from the depths of hell. The 6 of them were lying flat on a rooftop. They immediately turned toward the source of the sound and spotted a female zombie kneeling on the ground, her head bowed as she sobbed. "Holy!" Chris sucked in a sharp breath, his entire body breaking out in goosebumps. The sight was utterly horrifying. "I'm starving and I'm not crying. What's her problem?" Sean muttered, craning his neck to get a better look. "She's probably hungrier than you," Mia replied dryly. "We can't go that way. We'll have to find another route," Chris said decisively. The female zombie wasn't alone. Around her were dozens of other zombies, their movements quick and deliberate. They weren't the sluggish, mindless kind. They were clearly highly evolved. Besides the group they were tracking, the ones who had looted the supplies couldn't possibly be hiding here. If they were, they'd have been torn apart by the zombies long ago. The 6 of them were just about to take a detour when Laura, with her unervingly sharp senses, seemed to notice their gaze. Her hair hung loose, covering most of her face, leaving only one eye visible. Suddenly, she whipped her head around to look directly at them. The moment her eye locked onto them, her pupil contracted to a pinprick, making her look even more terrifying. Hee 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 hee. The eerie crying abruptly turned into a sinister laugh. In a flash, Laura's figure blurred as she bolted toward them like a gust of wind. "Damn it, we've been spotted." Chris's face darkened, his heart pounding with fear. He had never encountered a zombie this horrifying before. As Laura charged, her sudden movement startled the nearby zombies. Roar! Hundreds of elite zombies let out deafening howls, forming a small horde as they surged forward in a frenzy. Their movements were swift and agile, and with just a few leaps, they were already scaling the rooftops. Even though the 6 of them were perched high above, it was no longer a safe haven. "What do we do now?" Chris asked, panic creeping into his voice. For once, he was out of ideas. Mia, however, remained calm. "What else? We fight our way out." "Got it." The group, all awakeners with neurocore-enhanced abilities, drew alloy blade from their belts. These weapons, specially crafted by researchers, were both durable and razor-sharp, capable of cutting down high-tier zombies. Enjoy new adventures from Empire. But even with their weapons, the sheer number of elite zombies made them uneasy. Even Mia, the renowned awakener from Refuge 001, hailed as the strongest among them, couldn't guarantee victory. There were simply too many zombies. Even a lion could be overwhelmed by a pack of wolves. And to make matters worse, among the horde was Laura, a terrifyingly agile zombie queen. Laura's figure darted closer and closer. The recent peace in the area had left her and her kind restless. Boredom had driven her to the brink of madness, so much so that she had cried out in frustration earlier. Now, finally spotting prey, she was ecstatic. But just as she was about to reach her target, a voice echoed in her mind. Wait, don't kill them yet. Oh. Laura's rapid charge came to an abrupt halt. It was the voice of her leader. As much as she craved bloodshed, she had to obey. Reluctantly, she cast a lingering glance at Chris and the others before veering off to the side. What the? Chris's entire body trembled. He knew he'd never forget the haunting, resentful look in that female zombie's eye. But what happened next left them even more stunned. The once raging zombie horde suddenly quieted down. One by one, the zombies dispersed, retreating in all directions. Within moments, the entire horde had vanished. What just happened? The 6 of them were dumbfounded. It was the first time they had encountered anything like this. They had been ready to fight to the death, prepared for a desperate last stand. And yet, the zombie tide had simply melted away. Oh, I get it now, Sean said, nodding as if he'd cracked the case. They were just trying to scare us. Chris was speechless. Why would they bother scaring you? There's got to be something else going on. What kind of something else? Mia asked, equally puzzled. Still, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe this world wasn't always as bleak as it seemed. Sometimes it offered small, unexpected surprises. At that moment, a tall figure appeared at the end of the street. He was strikingly handsome, his sharp eyes scanning the group. Ethan's gaze landed on Mia. As he looked at her, her face began to overlap with a memory from his past. Childhood scenes played out in his mind, one after another, pulling him back to a time long gone. It's been a while, he said softly. Mia froze. After spending 10 years in a psychiatric facility, her heart had long since grown cold and unfeeling, like a slab of ice. But now, seeing that familiar figure, her heartbeat quickened. That face, it carried so many memories. Memories of warmth, of fleeting happiness in a life otherwise filled with despair. Sean, on the other hand, was ecstatic. He remembered Ethan vividly, and his unique eyes were already welling up with tears. In this desolate, post-apocalyptic world, running into a childhood friend felt like a miracle. Without hesitation, Sean leapt down from the rooftop and landed in front of Ethan. Ethan, it's really you. I can't believe we're meeting here. But Chris and the others weren't so quick to celebrate. The more they thought about what had just happened, the retreating zombies, the strange behavior, the more uneasy they felt. Adding to their suspicion was the resemblance between Ethan and a figure they'd seen in blurry photos circulating online. Sean, be careful. He might be a zombie. Chris warned. Don't be ridiculous. Sean snapped, clearly annoyed. How could you say that? He was visibly upset. After all, this was his childhood friend, someone he hadn't seen in 10 years. To hear him accused of being a zombie was infuriating. Ethan isn't a zombie. My eyes are like zombie detectors. I'd know if he was one. Sean declared confidently. Zombie detectors? Chris and the others stared at Ethan with what could only be described as a brilliant expression on his face. For some reason, the camera on this so-called detector seemed a little off-kilter. It's been a while, hasn't it? Mia leapt down from the rooftop, a rare trace of emotion flickering in her eyes. She hadn't expected to run into Ethan in this brutal, apocalyptic world. The coincidence was almost unbelievable. What are you doing here? Just passing through, Ethan replied casually. Sean, on the other hand, was visibly excited. With a big grin, he said, This place is a 5-star zombie nest. There were a ton of zombies here earlier. It was super dangerous. The fact that you made it out alive is pretty impressive. Ethan glanced at Sean, taking in those unique eyes of his. After all these years, Sean really hadn't changed one bit. What about you guys? What are you doing here? Someone stole our supplies and holed up in this area. We're here to track them down. Sean explained. Oh, Ethan raised an eyebrow. He'd heard about the stolen supplies from the shelter, but he hadn't expected the thieves to hide out in his territory. When did this happen? And why didn't he know about it? I know this area pretty well. Maybe I can help you find them. Really? That'd be awesome. Sean didn't think twice. To him, running into an old friend and having him join their group was nothing but good news. But Chris and the others standing behind him, they were frozen in place, too scared to make a move. In their minds, Ethan was most likely the zombie king, the source of all the danger in this area. And now Sean was inviting him to join their team. This world had officially gone insane. It was like a mouse inviting a cat to dinner. Mia nodded in agreement and added, "Yeah, once we find the supplies, we can take you back to the shelter. It's safe there." Chris and the others nearly choked. Sean was already ridiculous enough, but Mia? She was on another level. She was actually suggesting they bring Ethan back to the shelter. At this point, they weren't even sure if the shelter was safe anymore. That probably depended on Ethan's mood. Ethan thought for a moment, but didn't outright refuse. "We'll see." "All right," Mia replied, then turned to the four people behind her. "What are you guys doing still hiding on the roof? Come down already." Okay," Chris and the others answered hesitantly. Their voices were shaky, and their expressions were filled with worry, but they still jumped down to the street and cautiously approached. The closer they got to Ethan, the stronger their unease grew. They couldn't tell if it was just their imagination, but there was an inexplicable sense of danger in the air. And then they noticed Ethan's eyes. They were cold, devoid of any emotion. When he looked at them, it was as if he were staring at livestock. The only time his gaze showed any spark of life was when he spoke to Mia or Sean. "Let me introduce you," Mia said, gesturing to the group. "These four are awakeners from the shelter, Chris, Nick." She went through each name. Ethan responded with a single, indifferent grunt. He didn't even bother to look at the four of them, his attitude making it clear he didn't consider them worth his attention. Chris forced a smile, his nerves barely holding together. "Aha. Hi, nice to meet you." The four of them were on edge, but for now, it seemed like Ethan didn't intend to kill them. If he had, the horde of zombies from earlier would have been more than enough to finish them off. So, they decided to play dumb and pretend Ethan was just a regular human. Sean, however, wasn't pretending. He was genuinely clueless and incredibly enthusiastic. "Ethan, once we find the supplies, you got to join us for a feast. We'll have fried chicken and beer. It'll be like a reunion party." "Sure," Ethan agreed without hesitation. Just then, Sean's stomach let out a loud, embarrassing growl. The intense hunger made his head spin, his limbs go weak, and he almost collapsed on the spot. Ethan took one look at him and immediately understood his condition. "You're starving to this extent, and you're still thinking about treating me to a meal? How about I treat you first? You have food on you right now." Sean's brilliant eyes widened in disbelief. "A little, not much." With a casual wave of his hand, Ethan pulled out some bread, sausages, and a pack of beef jerky from his spatial storage ring. These were supplies he'd looted from a warehouse not long ago, priceless in this apocalyptic world. His storage ring was still stocked with plenty of them, but to him, they weren't of much use. Sean stared at the food, completely dumbfounded. It was like Ethan had conjured it out of thin air. Uncontrollable tears of gratitude welled up in his eyes, or maybe it was just drool. There was beef jerky in there, his favorite snack. "Thanks. I won't hold back then." Sean grabbed the food, tore open the packaging, and started stuffing his face. Enjoy exclusive content from Empire. The rich, oily flavor of the beef jerky spread across his tongue, the spicy and savory taste lighting up his senses. "This is amazing. Hunger truly is the best seasoning." In Sean's current state, the beef jerky tasted like the finest delicacy on earth. Watching Sean devour the food, Ethan couldn't help but be reminded of their childhood. Back in the orphanage, Sean had always loved beef jerky. He was so afraid of the other kids stealing it that he'd hide it under his blanket when he slept. Of course, it didn't take long for the jerky to get squished, leaving a greasy mess all over his bed. The headmaster had scolded him so badly that day. Gulp. Mia, watching Sean eat with such relish, couldn't help but swallow hard. Her mouth watered involuntarily, and her stomach let out a faint growl of its own. Ethan glanced at her, but didn't say anything. Instead, he pulled out more food, bread, sausages, and beef jerky, this time adding a bottle of chocolate-flavored Ensure meal replacement shake. He handed it to her. "I'm not hungry," Mia said, shaking her head in refusal. Ethan studied her for a moment. "Still the same as when we were kids. Soft all over, but stubborn to the core. It's fine. Just eat." "Okay." Mia hesitantly took the food, but her mind was still conflicted. In the apocalypse, food was incredibly precious. Ethan had just said he didn't have much, so she felt guilty taking it. "What's wrong now?" Ethan asked, noticing her hesitation and the strange look on her face. Mia stared at him blankly, then picked up the bread and said, "It's expired." Ethan was speechless. "Eat it or don't. Your choice." The bread's label did show it was past its expiration date, but since it had been stored in his spatial ring, it was perfectly preserved and completely safe to eat. Mia stopped overthinking it. "I'll just repay him later," she thought. She opened the packaging and began eating. Meanwhile, Chris and the other three stood in the back, staring intently at the food. Their stomachs churned, growling loudly as they watched, their mouths practically watering. But none of them dared to ask Ethan for anything. The way he'd pulled food out of thin air was enough to show how strange and powerful he was. And if they weren't careful, they might end up becoming the food. So, the four of them quickly turned their heads away. Out of sight, out of mind. It didn't take long for Mia to finish eating. She looked noticeably more energetic afterward. "I'll pay you back for this food," she said. "Or I can trade neurocores or crystal cores for it." In the shelter, one neurocore could be exchanged for a bag of instant noodles, and one crystal core could get you an entire box. This kind of value exchange was second nature to them now, so she felt awkward just taking Ethan's food for free. "Yeah, exactly." Sean chimed in, his mouth still greasy from the jerky. "We'll trade. I'm not just freeloading." Mia and Ethan finished eating, recharged their energy, and continued their search for members of the Black Hand Legion. Thanks to Ethan, the journey was surprisingly smooth. The ferocious zombies that usually roamed the streets seemed to have vanished without a trace. It was almost surreal. Mia felt like she was just taking a casual afternoon stroll through the city. Ethan chatted with the two of them as they walked, reminiscing about things like picking cherries and making dumplings. His demeanor was so relaxed. It was as if the apocalypse didn't exist. Chris and the others exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't dare ask questions, nor did they dare say anything. They simply followed behind in silence, doing their best to act invisible. But they couldn't help noticing something unusual. Mia, who was usually quiet and reserved, was talking a lot more than usual today. Far behind them, on the rooftop of a tall building, three figures stood watching: Bulldozer, Laura, and the PhD zombie. Their piercing, predatory eyes locked onto the group below. "Why is the boss hanging out with humans?" Laura asked, her tone tinged with jealousy. "Don't underestimate that human woman," the PhD said calmly. "I doubt even you could take her on." TCH. Laura scoffed, unconvinced. "If it weren't for the boss's orders, I'd have already cracked her skull open and eaten her brain." The PhD didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Bulldozer. "The boss is tracking some humans who snuck into the territory. They're heading toward the area you were supposed to patrol, right?" "Yeah, but they've got it wrong," Bulldozer said confidently. "I've been through that area a bunch of times. There's no way any humans could have gotten in." The three subordinates stood there, flanked by thousands of elite zombies below, all ready to act. For now, though, they were content to watch the drama unfold. Experience tales with Empire. By this time, Ethan and the group had reached the edge of his territory. Since the expansion, this was his first time patrolling this far out. From a distance, he caught the faint scent of blood in the air. There were definitely humans nearby. The street ahead used to be lined with karaoke bars, once a bustling nightlife hub filled with music, lights, and laughter. Now it was a wasteland. The buildings were cracked and crumbling. Signs had fallen. Shattered glass littered the ground, and bloodstains were everywhere, mingling with the mangled remains of corpses. Abandoned cars sat rusting on the roadside, their surfaces covered in thick webs. One building stood out. Its first-floor glass doors were shattered, weeds sprouted from the steps, and the interior was eerily quiet, just like the other ruins. But on the second floor, the windows had been boarded up. It was clear someone had been there. The modifications were unmistakable. "Found it," Mia said, her sharp eyes fixed on the building. She had clearly sensed something too. Behind them, Chris frowned. The Black Hand Legion had a reputation for being ruthless and cruel, and he couldn't help but voice his concern. According to the intel, there are over 10 Awakeners in there. They've also taken 3 hostages. The higher-ups want us to recover the supplies and rescue the hostages. Hostages? Ethan muttered under his breath. For some reason, the word felt foreign to him, like it didn't belong in his vocabulary. Chris hesitated, unsure how to respond, and decided to stay quiet. Sean glanced at Ethan. "I've heard the Black Hand Legion is brutal. Maybe you should stay back and let us handle this." "Brutal?" Ethan repeated, the word rolling off his tongue with a strange familiarity. "It's fine," he said casually. "I'll go in with you." "All right, but stick close to me," Sean said, nodding. He was confident in his abilities. After all, he was an Awakener from Refuge 002. With that, the group headed straight for the karaoke bar. Inside the building, 13 members of the Black Hand Legion were gathered. Among them, 6 had developed crystal cores and awakened abilities, making them exceptionally powerful. One of the 6 stood out, a woman with short hair and a tattoo on the right side of her face. The tattoo depicted a black hand gripping a skull, giving her an unsettling, almost deranged appearance. She was a psychic awakener, with an extraordinary sense of perception. Suddenly, the woman stood up from the sofa. "Gideon, someone's approaching us." "Oh." The bald man leading the group narrowed his eyes, a dangerous glint flashing in them. Even hiding out in a place like this, they'd still been found? "How many?" "6. Only 2 of them have crystal cores," the woman replied. Despite her heightened abilities, she couldn't sense Ethan's presence at all. The bald man let out a cold snort. "Just 2 Awakeners with crystal cores, and they think they can come after us? Overconfident fools. Let's go meet them." "Yeah." A man beside him chuckled sinisterly, clearly not taking the situation seriously. They left 3 people behind to guard the hostages, while the remaining 10 headed downstairs. By now, Ethan's group had entered the building. The crunch of shattered glass under their feet echoed through the first-floor lobby. It wasn't long before faint footsteps could be heard coming from upstairs. "They're coming down," Mia said calmly, stepping forward on her own. Chris and the others were too weak in combat for her to rely on. She figured it would be faster to handle this herself. At the top of the staircase, a group of people appeared. Leading them was the bald man, his triangular eyes gleaming with malice. His eyebrows were completely shaved off, giving him an even more menacing look. This was Gideon Voss, a mid-level leader of the Black Hand Legion, known by his nickname the Bald One. Behind him stood a motley crew of individuals, each with their own unique and intimidating appearance. Nose rings, lip piercings, tattoos covering their faces. Their expressions were hostile as they sized up Mia. Well, it really is her," one of them said with a sly grin. A young man in a leather jacket, his eyes gleaming with excitement, stepped forward. "Wait, you know her?" someone beside him asked, curious. "Yeah, I've seen her profile on the Refuge network," the leather-jacketed man replied, his expression turning lecherous. He had come across Mia's photo on the network before. The moment he saw her, he was struck by her beauty. She was stunning, almost unreal. Ever since then, he'd fantasized about meeting her in person. And now, here she was standing right in front of him. It felt like he'd hit the jackpot. What's more, he vividly remembered the short bio beneath her photo on the network. "I'm a gentle girl, afraid of pain." "I love gentle girls," the man said, licking his lips. "Gideon, let me handle her." "You've got good taste," Gideon said with a wicked grin. "Go ahead, she's all yours." It wasn't that they were stupid or overly cocky. Mia's aura, when she wasn't actively fighting, was subdued. To them, she seemed like nothing more than an ordinary Barank awakener. Most people wouldn't be able to sense her true strength. The leather-jacketed man's excitement was palpable. He crouched slightly, pulling a gleaming alloy dagger from a sheath strapped to his leg. The blade shimmered coldly, razor-sharp. "Hey, beautiful, let's have some fun," he sneered. In a flash, he lunged forward, the dagger aimed straight at Mia. His speed was impressive. He was a speed-enhanced awakener, and his movements were almost too fast to track. But Mia didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her large eyes fixed on him, unblinking. She didn't even flinch, let alone try to dodge. The glint of the dagger grew larger and larger in her pupils as it closed in, the blade mere inches from her face. Then, in an instant, Mia raised her hand and caught the blade mid-strike. Shhhk. Blood spurted from her palm, crimson streaks running down her wrist and staining her pale, porcelain skin. The vivid red stood out starkly against her white hand, creating a striking, almost surreal image. The sharp, searing pain coursed through her nerves, jolting every cell in her body into action. The killing instinct within her was on the verge of erupting. That single stab triggered Mia's awakening ability, deadly pain. Her aura surged, growing stronger by the second. On her right wrist, a bracelet displayed a glowing indicator. Pain level, 10%. The young man in the leather jacket immediately sensed something was wrong. He tried to pull his alloy dagger back, but Mia's grip was like a steel vise. No matter how hard he struggled, the blade wouldn't budge. In his frantic attempts to free the weapon, the dagger sank even deeper into her flesh. Blood oozed out, dripping through Mia's fingers. The pain level continued to rise. 15%. Crack. Mia suddenly exerted force, snapping the blade in half with her bare hands. Holding the broken shard, she lunged straight for the man's temple. Thud! The man didn't even have time to react. A sharp, stabbing pain exploded in his head as warm blood trickled down the side of his face. His vision blurred, and his consciousness began to fade. This is supposed to be the sweet girl? That was his final thought before his pupils dilated, and his lifeless body collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. In mere moments, Mia had taken down an awakener who had already formed a crystal core. Gideon and the others froze, their pupils contracting in shock. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The seemingly delicate girl had turned out to be utterly ruthless. She killed him that easily? Something's off about her. Everyone, stay alert. This girl is way more dangerous than she looks. The group's expressions grew grim. When Mia had killed the man, her face had remained calm, completely unperturbed. Her movements were precise, efficient, and merciless, clearly the work of someone who had done this many times before. Mia lowered her gaze to the corpse at her feet, as if suddenly remembering something. Slowly, she crouched down. Using the broken alloy blade, she pried open the man's skull. Then, with her pale fingers, she reached inside and began to rummage around. What the hell is she doing? Ethan couldn't help but ask, his curiosity piqued. Watching her movements, he was reminded of the time back at the orphanage when she helped prepare meals, kneading raw meat with her bare hands. The sticky, slimy sensation had been enough to make anyone gag. Before long, Mia found what she was looking for. She yanked out the man's crystal core, her hands now drenched in blood, along with bits of red and white matter clinging to her fingers. She stood up and walked over to Ethan, holding the bloodied core out to him. "You gave me bread. I'm giving you a crystal core in return." "Oh." Ethan nodded, realizing she'd been thinking about this the whole time. Just like before, she was still as impatient as ever. But as he looked at her outstretched hand, dripping with blood and other unidentifiable substances, he hesitated. Doesn't seem very sanitary, does it? It's fresh out of the skull. Still warm. Clean and hygienic, Mia replied, as if trying to reassure him. To Ethan, the scene was like someone spilling a bowl of beef stew on the floor, broth mixed with chunks of meat spreading everywhere, making it impossible to step anywhere without feeling queasy. He stayed rooted in place, unwilling to move. Mia's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly as she glanced at him, her expression puzzled. What are you hesitating for? It's just, eating like this doesn't feel very elegant, Ethan said, trying to keep a straight face. Mia's face darkened. Mimicking his earlier tone, she snapped, "Take it or leave it." The group of onlookers, including Gideon, stood frozen in place, too stunned to speak. This girl was terrifying. There was nothing gentle about her, contrary to what the leather-jacketed man had claimed. If anything, his death felt entirely deserved. At the same time, a question lingered in their minds. Is she really from the official shelter? Why does she seem even more brutal than us? The Black Hand Legion had done their share of atrocities, cannibalism, torture, murder, but there was one thing they lacked compared to Mia, her unnerving calmness. Wait, hold on. Suddenly, Gideon noticed something alarming. He scanned the group in front of him, his eyes moving from Ethan to Chris, counting each person carefully. No matter how he counted, there was one extra person. Emily, didn't you say there were 6 of them? Why are there 7 now? The short-haired girl furrowed her brows, her expression growing increasingly grim. Gideon, one of them doesn't seem human. What? Gideon's eyes widened in disbelief. He trusted Emily's psychic perception. It was rarely wrong. Not human. Then what were they? Following Emily's gaze, Gideon looked toward Ethan. He saw him casually pick up the blood-soaked crystal core and place in his mouth, savoring it as though it were the sweetest delicacy. The answer became glaringly obvious. A zombie. Gideon's heart sank. The people from the official shelter were traveling with a zombie? The absurdity of the situation was almost too much to process. A wave of intense danger washed over him as he glanced around. Right now, their only advantage was their numbers. Forget everything else. Kill them. Everyone attack. Got it. The others nodded silently. In an instant, the battle erupted. Members of the Black Hand Legion activated their awakening abilities, their auras flaring like wild beasts ready to pounce. Mia turned her head to glance at Ethan, her expression still calm. Stay here. Don't move. I'll go collect a few more crystal cores. Ethan raised an eyebrow. But before he could respond, Gideon and his main fighters had already closed in on Mia. Gideon's awakening ability was metallic skin, which made his body incredibly durable. His skin shimmered as it transformed, his entire body covered in a gleaming silver layer. Every movement he made produced the sound of clashing steel, as though he were wearing a full suit of armor. With a swing of his massive fist, carrying the force of a wrecking ball, he aimed straight for Mia's face. Mia didn't flinch. She calmly raised her slender arm to block the attack. Boom! A dull thud echoed as Mia absorbed the blow, though the sheer force pushed her back several feet. Her arm trembled, a sharp pain radiating through it. Pain level, 19%. Gideon's metallic face twisted into a grin. Now, hit her. Experience Tales at Empire. On it. Behind him, Emily responded immediately, unleashing a psychic attack. Her mental energy surged like a tidal wave, crashing into Mia's mind and triggering a mental storm. Mia's head felt like it had been doused in boiling oil. The excruciating pain clouded her thoughts, and her vision blurred as her consciousness began to waver. Gideon seized the opportunity, his massive fist swinging down again, this time aiming to crush her skull. But then, the numbers on Mia's bracelet shifted. Pain level, 27%. Her eyes snapped into focus, their clarity cutting through the haze. The pain didn't weaken her. It made her stronger. In a flash, she clenched her fist and struck Gideon's chest with a speed too fast for the eye to follow. Boom! Even with his metallic body, Gideon's chest caved in under the impact. The sheer force of the blow sent him flying backward like a rag doll, crashing through a wall and burying him under a pile of rubble. What? How is this possible? Emily's eyes widened in horror. Her leader, Gideon, had been sent flying despite her psychic attack. Her face twisted with rage, the Black Hand Legion tattoo on her cheek seeming to writhe like a living thing. But there was no time to dwell on it. She quickly turned her head, searching for Mia to launch another psychic assault. However, When she looked up, she was met with a pale, delicate face. Mia's face, already inches from her own. The next second, Mia's fingers, sharp as blades, plunged into the artery in her opponent's neck. Emily's face froze in an expression of sheer terror. Her mouth opened as if to say something, but all that came out was a gush of blood. Another body collapsed at Mia's feet. What happens if it hits 100%? A deep, magnetic voice suddenly spoke near her ear. She turned her head and saw Ethan's handsome face. Ethan had already noticed the peculiar detail on her wrist and couldn't help but ask. His curiosity piqued. Mia smiled faintly. "I'd probably die." The bracelet she wore was a custom device created by researchers. It was linked to her pain receptors, monitoring the maximum level of pain her body could endure. If it ever reached 100%, it would unlock Mia's strongest state, but it would also mean the end of her life. Meanwhile, Sean was locked in combat with an awakener who had condensed a crystal core. His opponent was a brute with enhanced strength, wielding a massive alloy battle axe that weighed several tons, yet he swung it as if it were weightless. The axe whistled through the air, aiming straight for Sean with devastating force. "Damn it, Mia's already paid her debt to Ethan. Guess it's my turn." Sean's sharp eyes darted around, calculating his next move. Suddenly, his body crackled with energy. His previously lean frame bulked up, muscles swelling as his physique became noticeably more powerful. This was Sean's awakener ability, Fearless Berserk. While it drastically reduced his intelligence, it massively boosted all his physical attributes. Sean's once sharp and calculating expression now bordered on vacant, almost dumb. But as the giant axe came hurtling toward him, he didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his fist to meet it head-on. Clang! The sound of metal reverberated through the air. The axe's handle bent under the impact, warping out of shape. Even the strength-enhanced awakener wielding it couldn't withstand the shock. His hands split open at the seams, blood dripping from his palms. The pain forced him to release the weapon, and the axe went flying. "What the?" The man's face twisted in disbelief. He hadn't expected Sean to be this strong. Before he could recover, Sean was already in front of him. With a single, devastating punch to the chest, the sound of bones shattering echoed in the air. The man's entire skeleton seemed to collapse inward, his body contorting grotesquely as he was sent flying like a broken rag doll. "Got him," Sean said, clenching his fist triumphantly. The small fry from the Blackhand Legion were no match for Mia and her team. The two sides weren't even in the same league. After all, Mia and her group were awakeners from Refuge number 001, the strongest of their kind. Even Chris and the other 3 team members worked seamlessly together. Armed with alloy blades, they formed a tactical formation and engaged several awakeners who had condensed neurocores. It didn't take long before they took down 2 of them. God damn it, they're this strong. Gideon, who had been sent flying earlier, struggled to sit up from the pile of rubble he'd landed in. He looked around and realized 2 of his strongest fighters had already been killed. What made it worse was Mia. She wasn't even fully engaged in the fight. She was casually chatting with Ethan, the 2 of them laughing and talking like they were catching up over coffee. It was clear they didn't see him as a threat at all. A wave of panic washed over Gideon. It felt like a steel spike was pressing against his forehead, a constant reminder that death was looming over him. The thought of escape crept into his mind, but he knew there was no way he could outrun Mia. Then, he remembered there were still 3 of his men upstairs, guarding the hostages from the refuge. That's my last card to play. With that, Gideon leapt to the 2nd floor in a single bound. Back on the 1st floor, Gideon's remaining men were already struggling to hold their ground. When they saw their leader abandon them, despair set in. A single thought echoed in their minds. Son of a bitch. Moments later, Chris and the others cut them down one by one. The battle on the 1st floor was over. Ethan hadn't lifted a finger. After all, these were just small fry, not worth his effort. He was content to watch from the sidelines. "Here, take these." Sean walked over, holding a crystal core and several neurocores, and handed them to Ethan. Ethan glanced at him. "Isn't this a bit much?" "Nope. The dean used to tell us when we were kids A small act of kindness can change someone's life. You gave me bread when I was starving, so I owe you big time, Sean said with conviction, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan didn't argue further and accepted the crystal core and neurocores. Upstairs, in the second-floor lobby, what was once a bustling karaoke bar was now eerily empty. The air was thick with tension. In the center of the room, 3 people knelt on the floor, trembling. They were bound with iron chains, muffled cries escaping from behind the tape covering their mouths. Gideon ripped the tape off their mouths, intending to use their pleas for help as leverage. Maybe, just maybe, if Mia had a soft spot, she'd let him go. It wasn't long before Ethan and the others arrived. Mia, please save me. I don't want to die. Please, one of the hostages wailed, tears streaming down his face. Stay back. Don't come any closer, or I'll kill them right now. Gideon barked, his voice sharp and desperate. Mia tilted her head, her gaze shifting to the hostages. The 3 captives were trembling uncontrollably, their cries for help growing louder. They were utterly terrified, on the verge of breaking down. Ethan, as usual, stayed back, watching the scene unfold with mild curiosity. He wanted to see how Mia would handle the situation. Mia, hearing Gideon's threat, actually stopped in her tracks. She didn't move forward, but instead stood still, her expression thoughtful, as if she were calculating something. Saving one awakener and bringing them back to the refuge would get me 2 cans of meat. But killing Gideon would earn me a crystal core. No matter how I look at it, killing him is the better deal. Gideon noticed Mia's hesitation and assumed his threat had worked. A smug grin spread across his face. People from the refuge, he thought, were so bound by their rules and regulations. They were used to being controlled, and it made them predictable. Pathetic, really. Your superiors must have ordered you to save people, right? Gideon sneered. Yeah, Mia replied with a small nod, not bothering to deny it. Gideon's grin widened. Good. Then let us go, and I'll let you take these 3 with you. That won't be necessary, Mia said, her voice calm. Because I don't follow orders. Enjoy exclusive content from Empire. What? Gideon froze, his smugness evaporating in an instant. He realized what she meant. Even the 3 hostages looked stunned, their faces blank with confusion. For a moment, they thought they were saved. But now, their hopes plummeted, crashing into despair. Before anyone could react, Mia made her move. In a flash, her figure blurred as she darted forward with lightning speed. Gideon clenched his jaw, his body tensing under the immense pressure. But desperation fueled his resolve, and he roared with fury. Brothers, fight to the death. He spat the words through gritted teeth, slashing his hand down in a decisive motion. His blade sliced toward the hostages. If he was going to die, he'd take a few with him. Yeah, fight to the death, his 3 subordinates echoed, their voices filled with defiance. They were all awakeners who had condensed crystal cores, and their combined strength was nothing to scoff at. Boom! The fight erupted in an instant. Mia clashed with Gideon head-on, their fists colliding with a deafening impact. The sheer force sent Gideon flying, smashing through 2 walls of private karaoke rooms before he finally came to a stop. But Gideon's metallic skin absorbed most of the damage. He crawled out of the rubble, relatively unscathed, and charged at Mia again. Meanwhile, Sean was locked in combat with Gideon's 3 subordinates. The trio worked together seamlessly, using their agility and coordination to keep Sean occupied. For now, they managed to hold their ground, preventing him from gaining the upper hand. The entire lobby descended into chaos. Tiles shattered, walls crumbled, and waves of energy rippled through the air. Chris and the other 3 team members stayed back, standing behind Ethan. This was a battle between awakeners who had condensed crystal cores. At their neurocore stage, they weren't qualified to join in. Among all the chaos, the fight between Mia and Gideon was the most intense. No matter how many times Mia sent Gideon flying, he always got back up like an indestructible cockroach. His defensive abilities were formidable, and Mia's strength which relied on her pain threshold, wasn't enough to break through his defenses. For now, she couldn't deal any significant damage. Tisich, if that's the case, I'll have to use the old method, Mia muttered, her eyes narrowing. There were plenty of ways to increase her pain threshold. The simplest? Self-harm. Back when she was in the psychiatric hospital, she'd done it countless times. Just as she was about to act, a voice called out from behind her. Hey, don't bother. Mia was undeniably powerful, but she was nothing like Ethan when it came to fighting. Her style was brutal, messy, and downright violent. Blood and gore splattered everywhere, leaving a chaotic scene in her wake. She turned her head and saw Ethan approaching, his steps steady, his expression calm. She immediately understood what he meant without him saying a word. Taking a few steps back, she ceded the battlefield to him. Gideon, on the other hand, narrowed his eyes as he watched Ethan. His heart skipped a beat. The intense battle earlier had left him disoriented, and in the chaos, he had completely forgotten about the most dangerous person in the room. Ethan hadn't made a single move the entire time, and no one knew what his awakened ability was. Gideon didn't dare let his guard down. Forcing himself to focus, he directed all his attention toward Ethan. But Ethan kept walking, his pace unchanging, the distance between them shrinking with every step. What's he up to? Gideon thought, confused. He watched as Ethan came closer and closer until he was right in front of him. At this point, Gideon had no choice but to act. Die! Gideon roared, his voice like the screech of grinding metal. He swung his massive, steel-like fist straight at Ethan. In that instant, Ethan's eyes flashed red. Domain of the Dead activated. A suffocating pressure filled the air, enveloping Gideon completely. Over the past few days, Ethan had been holed up at home, evolving and growing stronger. Now, his Domain of the Dead was more powerful than ever. Gideon felt as if his body had been plunged into the depths of the ocean. The crushing weight made it nearly impossible for him to move. Ethan sidestepped effortlessly, dodging Gideon's punch. As he passed by, he extended his hand, his fingers piercing straight into Gideon's skull. In one fluid motion, he pulled out the crystal core lodged inside. The entire sequence was seamless, clean, and efficient, like someone casually picking up an object. It didn't take the slightest effort. What? Gideon's face froze in shock. The life drained from his body in an instant. His metallic skin faded away, revealing his original form underneath. His body tilted backward and collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. He was dead. Gideon's eyes remained wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Even in death, he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. He died with unresolved confusion, unable to rest in peace. The whole thing had taken only a few seconds, the time it took Ethan to walk a few steps. Extracting Gideon's crystal core had been as easy as reaching into a bag and pulling something out. Chris and the others were dumbfounded. It was their first time witnessing such a method of killing. Gideon's body looked completely intact, yet his crystal core had been removed. A phantom infected. There was no doubt about it. Ethan was a phantom infected. A chill ran down their spines, and their hair stood on end. Fear gripped them as they became even more certain. Ethan was the zombie king of the phantom infected, capable of killing without leaving a trace. Gideon's three subordinates were equally stunned, their faces frozen in disbelief. Their boss just died? Just like that? What the hell had just happened? While one of them was still in shock, Sean seized the opportunity. He swung his fist into the man's chest, shattering his bones with a sickening crunch. The man let out a scream before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. Damn it! The remaining two finally realized the situation was hopeless. No matter how hard they fought, it was all in vain. Their will to fight crumbled. Their mental defenses shattered, and they were quickly overwhelmed. Sean took them down with ease. And with that, the battle was over. Silence returned to the room. The KTV lounge was a wreck, littered with bodies. 3 hostages and 13 members of the Black Hand Legion, all dead. Ethan, you're incredible. You took down that metal guy like it was nothing. Sean exclaimed, his eyes wide with amazement. You're not too bad yourself, Ethan replied. He hadn't expected Sean, of all people, to awaken such a powerful ability. Sean burst out laughing. Ha ha, so you noticed, huh? The others were busy cleaning up the battlefield, while Mia walked over to the bodies of the 3 hostages. She stood there, staring down at them with an unblinking gaze. It seemed like she felt regret that they hadn't been able to save them in time. Then she crouched down, her fingers piercing into their skulls one by one, carefully extracting their neurocores. Enemy crystal cores are valuable, but we shouldn't waste our own people's neurocores either, she muttered under her breath. Maybe it was because she'd lived through hard times, but Mia had a habit of being frugal. She was, in a way, a practical and resourceful girl. Meanwhile, Chris and the others were off to the side, holding a communicator and reporting the situation to the headquarters of the shelter. The Black Hand Legion members have been dealt with. Total number of hostiles, 13. Actual kills, 16. At the same time, Ethan had also embraced his own version of frugality. He wandered upstairs and downstairs, collecting all 16 corpses and storing them in his spatial storage ring. Sean, watching this unfold, was completely dumbfounded. He couldn't help but blurt out, "Wait, where'd the bodies go? Did you just take them?" "Yeah," Ethan replied casually. "Packing them up to take back as dog food." "Damn," Sean scratched his head, looking a little bewildered. Was Ethan treating this like a buffet? And now he was even packing leftovers to go? Elsewhere, Mia and the others had found the supplies that had been stolen. To be honest, it wasn't much. Ethan glanced over the hall. 5 boxes of instant noodles, a few crates of canned beef, 2 bags of rice, and a bag of flour. There were also some fruit cans, chocolate, and other snacks, but most of it was expired. Gideon and his crew had already eaten a good chunk of it. One of them finally broke the silence. "Boss, were those your friends?" It was clear that the shelter was seriously short on resources. The fact that they'd sent Mia, their number 001, and Sean, their number 002, for such a small stash showed just how desperate they were. "All right, let's head back," Mia said. Sean's face lit up with excitement. "Yeah, we got food this time." Behind them, Chris and the other 3 had taken on the role of porters, hauling the rice in crates. They looked a bit disheveled, struggling under the weight of the supplies. What's more, the 4 of them were absolutely terrified of Ethan. They didn't dare get close to him, keeping a safe distance as they followed far behind. "Ethan, why don't you come back to the shelter with us?" Sean asked. "No," Ethan replied, shaking his head. Sean looked confused. "Why not?" "I don't need a shelter," Ethan said simply. "Oh," Sean nodded, though it was clear he didn't fully understand. By now, they had reached the street where they'd first met. It was time to part ways. Mia's large eyes fixed on Ethan. "When will we see you again? If the shelter ever runs out of food, you can trade crystal cores with me for supplies," Ethan said after a moment of thought. "All right," Mia agreed without hesitation. It was a straightforward business arrangement. To make things easier, the 2 exchanged contact information online so they could stay in touch and chat if needed. With everything settled, Ethan said his goodbyes. "This is it. See you next time." "Yeah, see you," Mia replied. Without looking back, she turned and walked away. Find more to read at Empire. Chris and the others, weighed down with supplies, made a wide detour around Ethan, clearly still afraid of him. They hurried to catch up with Mia, practically jogging to keep pace. "Bye, Ethan. Let's chat online later," Sean called out, waving as he turned to leave. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the street. Their shadows stretched long across the ground as Mia and her group gradually disappeared into the distance. Ethan stood there, watching them until they vanished at the end of the street. Then, from the alleys, side streets, and nearby buildings, zombies began to emerge. One by one, they gathered behind Ethan. Among them were hulking bulldozers, the eerie Laura, and even the PhD zombie. They all assembled in an orderly fashion, standing silently behind him. Ethan gave a soft response, then turned and walked toward the building. Laura tilted her head, looking a little puzzled. The boss has friends? That was new, but before she could dwell on it, A mouth-watering aroma hit her like a wave. As Ethan walked away, he casually tossed out a pile of corpses, some of them still warm. Laura grinned wide, deciding not to overthink it. Mia and her group had walked quite a distance without encountering any zombies. It wasn't until they left Ethan's territory that the terrifying figures began to reappear. But they were just low-level zombies, weak enough that even regular people could handle them. For Awakeners, they posed no threat at all. Mia, did you notice something? Chris suddenly asked. Notice what? Mia turned to look at him. Chris explained, we didn't see any zombies until we left that 5-star zombie nest. That means your friend is probably the king of that nest. Explore new worlds at Empire. Oh, Mia nodded, her expression calm and unreadable. Wait, that's it. Chris froze, stunned. Her reaction wasn't what he expected. Shouldn't she be shocked? Beside them, Sean scratched his head. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but after everything they'd been through, he was starting to piece things together. Mia, do you think Ethan is really a zombie? Sean asked hesitantly. Human or zombie, does it matter? Mia's voice paused for a moment before she continued. As long as he's Ethan, that's all that matters. Near the building, the setting sun painted the sky a deep crimson, like blood smeared across the heavens. A few black crows circled overhead, cawing as they flew. Under the desolate, apocalyptic sky, a few zombies were feasting on fresh flesh. The boss is the best. He goes out hunting himself and brings food back for us. Laura's chin was smeared with blood as she spoke. The nearby zombies nodded enthusiastically in agreement. In most other nests, it was the underlings who hunted and offered their spoils to the zombie king. But Ethan was the complete opposite, and this gesture left Laura and the others deeply moved. The zombies were happily devouring their meal, but one of them, Bulldozer, sat off to the side, lost in thought. His expression carried a hint of guilt. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd failed in his duties. There had been humans hiding in the area he was supposed to patrol, and he hadn't noticed. Yet Ethan hadn't blamed him. Instead, he brought back food for everyone. This only made Bulldozer feel worse. Laura glanced over at him. Not eating, not hungry, Bulldozer replied, crossing his arms and turning his head away with a huff. He was already planning to hunt some humans himself to make up for his failure and show his loyalty to the boss. Laura, while intelligent, wasn't perceptive enough to guess what he was thinking. She had no idea what was going on in his head. If you don't eat now, it'll all be gone soon. Then you'll have nothing left, she warned. Oh, Bulldozer's eyes flicked toward the pile of flesh, and despite himself, he licked his lips. Maybe just a bite or two, he muttered. The next few days passed peacefully with nothing significant happening. Ethan stayed holed up in his home, living a leisurely life. He spent his days gathering intel, absorbing energy, and occasionally chatting with Mia online. The hunger, violence, and danger of the outside world seemed completely disconnected from him. The area around the building had become his personal paradise. Ethan had considered it before. Mia and Sean were both strong, and with his food supply being more than sufficient, it wouldn't be a problem to let them stay by his side. If trouble ever came knocking, they'd be two powerful allies. But Mia and Sean weren't just ordinary people. They were Awakeners from Refuge 001 and 002, practically celebrities in their own right. And as the saying goes, the tallest tree catches the wind. If they stayed, peace would be out of the question. So, Ethan decided to let go of the idea for now. It was better for them to remain in the refuge. After all, they could still maintain a cooperative relationship from afar. Downstairs, Laura and the other zombies were bored out of their minds. Every day, they wandered the streets, patrolling the territory. But no matter how hard they tried, there was never anything to show for it. The most dejected of them all was Bulldozer. With his current level of intelligence, roughly that of a 7- or 8-year-old child, he still couldn't let go of his guilt over his earlier failure. At the moment, his massive frame was slumped on the side of the street, his broad back radiating a sense of melancholy. Where can I go to kill someone? I need to make up for my mistake. I have to hunt something bring it back as an offering to the boss. Otherwise, I'll just keep feeling guilty. But the main city had long since fallen. It was a zombie stronghold now, with not a single human in sight. At best, he might be able to fish a few oversized rats out of the sewers. Still, the thought of presenting 2 sewer rats to Ethan as an offering made Bulldozer shudder. He was pretty sure the boss would crush him on the spot. What do I do? As Bulldozer sat there, racking his brain, the sound of flapping wings suddenly reached his ears. A red-eyed crow landed on a nearby street lamp. Under the blood-red sky, the crow's beak was smeared with blood, and it was holding a human eyeball in its mouth. The scene was grotesque, to say the least. Bulldozer's small eyes lit up as he stared at the bird, as if he'd just discovered a treasure. Sensing his gaze, the crow tilted its head back and swallowed the eyeball in one gulp. Then it shot Bulldozer a disdainful look. "Big idiot," the crow croaked. Bulldozer was speechless. He felt a flicker of annoyance, but quickly swallowed it down. He needed something from the bird, so he let slide. "Hey, little shadow bird, do you know where I can find prey?" he asked. "Of course I do." The crow's crimson eyes blinked slyly. Bulldozer perked up, his excitement barely contained. "Where? Tell me." "I'm not telling you," the crow replied smugly. Bulldozer scratched his head, feeling a bit awkward. He figured the bird was still holding a grudge from that time he'd try to catch it. He hadn't even managed to grab it, but apparently, the attempt was enough to sour their relationship. "Come on, just tell me. I need to hunt something to offer to the boss." Too dangerous, too dangerous. If you go, you won't come back," the crow warned. As if. Bulldozer scoffed. He didn't believe it for a second. He was one of the most well-known zombie kings in the area, and besides, he worked for Ethan. How could he not come back? "Just tell me. If I catch something, I'll share it with you." The crow didn't respond immediately. Its eyes darted around as it thought for a moment. Then, with a few flaps of its wings, it took off into the air. Follow me," it called. Hee. Bulldozer let out a goofy laugh, grinning like an overgrown child. He stood up from the curb, his massive frame towering over the street. The red-eyed crow flew down the road, its wings flapping rhythmically as it muttered to itself. "Treasure, treasure." Oh, Bulldozer's jaw dropped into an O shape. It seemed there wasn't just prey, there was treasure too. His curiosity was piqued. Could it be a big, juicy prey? He wondered, his excitement growing. Without hesitation, he followed the crow. The bird soared through the air, its speed impressive, but Bulldozer was no slouch. Despite his massive size, he moved with surprising agility, leaping between buildings and scaling walls like a giant, nimble ape. The two of them, one in the air, the other on the ground, chased each other deeper and deeper into the city. It quickly became clear that the location the crow was leading him to was far beyond Ethan's territory. Bulldozer and Raven sped forward, darting through the wreckage-strewn streets. A few zombies noticed them, tilting their heads back to let out low growls. Clearly, they had wandered out of their usual territory. About 10 minutes later, in the distance, Bulldozer spotted a skyscraper with thick black smoke billowing from it, forming a dark cloud in the sky. A helicopter had crashed into the middle floors of the building, its wreckage engulfed in flames. The building's floor-to-ceiling windows were completely shattered, revealing a chaotic scene inside. On one of the middle floors, a group of humans was locked in combat with zombies. And that wasn't all. Around the skyscraper, an unending tide of zombies surged forward like a relentless wave, surrounding the humans and cutting off any escape. Some zombies had already breached the building, while others climbed the walls like insects, their sheer numbers creating a grotesque and overwhelming spectacle. "There really are people in there," Bulldozer muttered under his breath. "Treasure, treasure." Raven flapped its wings, repeating the word like a mantra. Squinting, Bulldozer focused on the scene and noticed that one of the humans was clutching a metal case. The case was handcuffed to his wrist, and the others in the group were clearly protecting him. Enjoy exclusive content from Empire. It was obvious. The case was incredibly important to them. "What's in that thing?" Bulldozer wondered aloud, his curiosity piqued. The man holding the case was Maxwell Hunt, a high-ranking executive at Genesis Biotech. He had just retrieved something of immense value from the company's headquarters, now locked securely inside the case. Unfortunately, on his way back via helicopter, disaster struck. A mutated flying beast, a massive blackbird, had collided with the aircraft. Its body, as powerful as a cannonball, shattered the helicopter's windshield, and its razor-sharp beak pierced the pilot's eye socket. The helicopter spiraled out of control and crashed into zombie territory. Luckily, the passengers were all awakeners, humans with enhanced abilities. Aside from the pilot, everyone survived the crash. But the swarm of zombies in the area had quickly turned their situation into a life-or-death struggle. "Hurry! Zombies are climbing up," Maxwell shouted urgently. Beside him, an awakener with ice-based powers stepped forward. A chilling aura radiated from his hands as he conjured countless ice spikes, launching them at the zombies, scaling the walls outside the shattered windows. The ice spikes were razor-sharp, far more lethal than bullets. They tore through the zombies, sending them plummeting from the high-rise. But there were just too many of them. The horde kept coming, wave after wave, and in the distance a zombie king loomed, overseeing the attack. On the rooftop of a 3-story building across the street, a tall, menacing figure stood watching. Its mouth was filled with jagged fangs, and its glowing red eyes radiated malice. This was its territory, the area it patrolled and controlled. It hadn't expected such a windfall today, a helicopter literally falling from the sky. The Zombie King had immediately rallied its minions to attack. While the human awakeners were strong, even the fiercest tiger couldn't fend off a pack of wolves forever. The awakeners were burning through their powers, and it was only a matter of time before exhaustion set in. The Zombie King simply had to wait and let its horde wear them down. Meanwhile, in the distance, Bulldozer and Raven were staring at the scene, wide-eyed. "Let's go. We'll grab that treasure for ourselves," Raven squawked, its red eyes gleaming. As it turned out, Raven was the one who had taken down the helicopter in the first place. Seeing the treasure fall into someone else's hands was something it couldn't accept. "Fine by me. Who's afraid of a fight?" Bulldozer grinned, unfazed. Even though they were deep in enemy territory, surrounded by countless zombies, he wasn't about to back down. Without hesitation, they charged toward the battlefield. Bulldozer moved with incredible agility, barreling through the horde and knocking zombies aside like bowling pins as he made his way to the base of the skyscraper. With a powerful leap, he launched himself onto the building's wall. Like a real-life Spider-Man, he began scaling the structure with astonishing speed and precision. "Watch out! There's a mutant zombie," Maxwell shouted, his voice filled with tension. Bulldozer's size and speed made him stand out immediately, catching Maxwell's attention. The ice-wielding awakener beside him wasted no time, summoning another barrage of ice spikes and hurling them downward at the approaching threat. "Roar!" Bulldozer let out a furious bellow, raising his right hand to shield his face. The sharp ice spikes slammed into his palm, but his thick, leathery skin absorbed most of the impact. The spikes only managed to pierce the surface, drawing blood, but causing no significant damage. Crack! With a savage grip, Bulldozer crushed the ice spikes embedded in his hand into shards. Then, with a powerful push from his legs, he launched himself upward, leaping over 60 feet in one bound. The gap between him and the human's defensive position was rapidly closing. "This zombie is strong," Maxwell muttered, his frown deepening as he watched Bulldozer approach. On the opposite rooftop, the towering Zombie King, who had been observing the battle, was equally surprised. It didn't recognize Bulldozer as one of its subordinates. Whose underling is this? But seeing Bulldozer attacking the humans, the Zombie King didn't dwell on it. Instead, it signaled its minions to assist him, assuming they were on the same side. Bulldozer was indeed ferocious. His massive hand gripped the windowsill, and with a single pull, his muscular frame vaulted into the building. The humans inside instinctively retreated, their faces pale with fear. With the windowsill breached, the zombies outside began pouring in one after another. Their bloodthirsty eyes gleamed as they snarled and lunged at the humans. "I'll hold them off," shouted the ice-wielding awakener. He stepped forward, both hands outstretched, as an intense chill filled the air. Frost began to spread rapidly, accompanied by the sharp cracking sounds of ice forming. Before him, an ice wall was beginning to take shape, thick and solid. But just as the wall was about to fully form, a sudden shadow streaked through the air. It moved with terrifying speed, striking from the side like a dagger. A sharp, black beak pierced straight into the awakener's temple. Squelch! Warm blood sprayed everywhere as the ice awakener collapsed to the ground, lifeless. "What the?" Maxwell's eyes widened in shock as he turned to see the attacker. It was the same massive blackbird that had brought down their helicopter. This wasn't a coincidence. It had all been part of a calculated plan. The red-eyed raven wasn't just any bird. It was a predator capable of devouring 2 humans in one sitting, its potential as a threat immeasurable. With the ice awakener dead, the zombies surged forward. In groups of 2 or 3, they tackled the remaining humans to the ground, tearing into them with teeth and claws. The scene descended into utter chaos, filled with the sounds of snarling, roaring, and agonized screams. Bulldozer ignored the carnage around him. His focus was singular and unwavering. With a few powerful strides, he closed the distance to Maxwell, his massive hand reaching out to grab the case. "Treasure," Bulldozer growled, his eyes locked on the prize. "Hunt." Maxwell's face twisted in desperation as he clung to the case with all his strength. "Get away from me." But Bulldozer's strength was overwhelming. With a single yank, he nearly pulled both the case and Maxwell into his grasp. Maxwell's eyes turned bloodshot as a wave of heat radiated from his body. He was a fire-type awakener, but the earlier battle had drained him of most of his energy. Now, he was running on fumes, using the last reserves of his strength. Flames erupted from Maxwell's left arm, engulfing it in a blazing inferno. He grabbed Bulldozer's wrist with his burning hand, trying to force him to let go. Sizzle. The acrid smell of burning flesh filled the air as smoke rose from Bulldozer's arm. The stench was nauseating like charred pigskin. "Let go of me," Maxwell roared, his voice hoarse. "Treasure," Bulldozer growled again, his obsession with the case overriding the pain. Even as his flesh burned, he refused to release his grip, his single-minded determination driving him forward. Sweat poured down Maxwell's face in large beads, his complexion pale and his vision blurring. His body was nearing its limit, completely drained from the relentless fighting and the strain of using his powers. Squelch! Seizing the moment, Bulldozer yanked the case with all his might. The sickening sound of tearing flesh and snapping bone echoed through the room as Maxwell's right arm was ripped apart at the elbow. Blood sprayed. Maxwell let out a blood-curdling scream as he collapsed to the ground. Without the protection of the flames, the surrounding zombies swarmed him, burying him under the relentless tide of the horde. "The prize is ours." Bulldozer held the box in his massive hands, the handcuffs still attached to half of a severed arm dangling from it. The few remaining humans in the area had already been torn apart and devoured. The zombies, victorious in this battle, were in a frenzy of excitement. "Rared!" Bulldozer joined in, raising the box high above his head like a trophy, as if he'd just won the World Cup. There was a hint of showboating in his actions, even though he had no idea what was actually inside the box. What made it even more amusing was how the surrounding zombies played along, letting out low growls and howls, celebrating with him. "Big idiot. What are you showing off for? Get moving already," came the sharp, bird-like voice of Crow. "Huh, all right." Bulldozer snapped out of his excitement. This wasn't his turf. It was dangerous here, and he needed to leave fast. He quickly toned down his bravado, clutching the box tightly to his chest, and began to sneak away as inconspicuously as possible. "Hey, stop right there." Suddenly, a deep, gravelly voice, like stones grinding together, echoed from behind him. It was the towering zombie king, the one who ruled this territory. Enjoy new chapters from Empire. Bulldozer froze mid-step, his massive frame stiffening. He didn't turn around, leaving only his broad back for the zombie king to see. The arrival of the zombie king silenced the rest of the horde. The lesser zombies all turned their attention to their leader, then followed his gaze to the hulking figure of Bulldozer. In an instant, Bulldozer became the center of attention. Sometimes being the star of the show isn't such a good thing, Bulldozer muttered to himself. The towering zombie king had already figured out that Bulldozer didn't belong to this territory. Hand over what you're carrying. Hand over my ass. Bulldozer snapped back without hesitation, then barked at Crow, "Run." Without waiting for a response, he bolted, not even glancing back. His massive frame barreled forward, smashing through several walls as he charged through the building. The zombie king's glowing, menacing eyes narrowed. He immediately realized something was wrong. "Get him! Rare!" The horde roared in unison, chasing after Bulldozer and Crow with feral intensity. But the two were incredibly fast. Bulldozer, in particular, was like a human wrecking ball, smashing through anything in his path and maintaining a straight-line sprint no matter what stood in his way. Finally, he reached the edge of the building. Without hesitation, he leaped off, soaring through the air from a height of several stories. Crap! Mid-air, Bulldozer realized something was wrong. It wasn't the fall that worried him. He wasn't afraid of that. The problem was the street below. It was packed with a dense swarm of zombies, as if they'd been waiting for him all along. Boom! Bulldozer landed in the middle of the horde with a thunderous crash, the sheer force of his impact cracking the pavement and sending several zombies flying. But the rest of the horde wasted no time. They lunged at him from all directions. Bulldozer charged forward like a raging bull, plowing through the mass of undead. Even when zombies clung to his back, biting and clawing at him, he didn't slow down or pay them any mind. But then, from behind, the towering zombie king appeared, leading a group of elite zombies in pursuit. If they caught him, no matter how strong Bulldozer was, he'd be torn to shreds. "Head for the rooftop! The rooftop!" Crow's sharp voice echoed from above as it circled in the air, offering advice. Oh! Bulldozer glanced up. Sure enough, there was a tall building ahead. Without hesitation, he charged forward, took a massive leap, and latched onto the wall, climbing upward with incredible speed. In just a few moments, he reached the top. The regular zombies couldn't climb, but the elite ones, those were a different story. They were already hot on his heels. "Stop running." Bulldozer turned his head and saw the towering zombie king leading the pack, closing in fast. Without missing a beat, Bulldozer sprinted across the rooftop, leaping from one building to the next like a world-class parkour athlete. His massive frame moved with surprising agility, but the zombie king was even faster. After all, Bulldozer was built for raw power, not speed. Against an opponent of the same level, he was at a clear disadvantage. The zombie king was gaining on him, and behind it, hundreds of elite zombies followed like a pack of ravenous wolves, relentless in their pursuit. "I can't outrun them," Bulldozer muttered, clutching the box tightly. He glanced back at the approaching zombie king. If things got any worse, he'd have no choice but to fight. But before he could act, Crow's voice rang out again, calm and sharp. "You need to find a place to hide." "Huh. Oh, right." Bulldozer's eyes lit up. That was a good idea. Why hadn't he thought of it? Ahead of him, the rooftop's edge loomed closer. The building was over 300 feet tall. Instead of aiming for the next rooftop, Bulldozer made a bold decision. He dove straight off the edge, heading for the street below. The zombie king slowed, sensing something was off. Bulldozer's massive figure plummeted downward, disappearing from view in an instant. The zombie king rushed to the edge and peered down, scanning the street below. To its surprise, the street was empty. Bulldozer was nowhere to be seen. "Boss, where'd he go?" one of the elite zombies asked, equally confused as it joined the search. The zombie king frowned, thinking for a moment. "He's still nearby. He's hiding. Spread out and find him." "Yes, sir." The elite zombies scattered, combing the area. Meanwhile, Bulldozer and Crow had already slipped into a small room inside the building. When Bulldozer had jumped off the rooftop, he hadn't landed on the street. Instead, he'd grabbed onto a windowsill mid-fall and swung himself inside the building. Now, he crouched in the corner of the room, his massive frame awkwardly hunched over, clutching the box tightly. "Little shadow bird, that was a great idea," Bulldozer whispered, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "Of course it was," Crow replied smugly, its red eyes gleaming. "But what now? We're stuck here. There's no way out." Bulldozer frowned. He knew the Zombie King wouldn't give up. Its minions would only gather in greater numbers, eventually surrounding the entire area. It was only a matter of time before they found him. As the minutes ticked by, the situation grew more dire. Crow, ever the problem solver, flapped its wings and said, "Don't worry. I'll go get help. You just stay hidden." "What? How are you going to get out?" "The whole place is crawling with them. If you go out there, they'll spot you and eat you alive." Bulldozer protested, his voice filled with concern. Crow blinked its red eyes, pausing for a moment. Then it gave Bulldozer a look that could only be described as the avian equivalent of "Are you stupid?" "I can fly, dumbass," it said flatly, flapping its wings for emphasis before darting out the window. Bulldozer was speechless. He'd completely forgotten that birds could fly. As he sat there in silence, he couldn't help but feel a little touched. Crow could have flown away at any time, but it had stayed to help him. It had waited until he was safely hidden before leaving to get help. "Yeah, it's a good bird," Bulldozer muttered to himself, nodding in approval. But just as he was starting to relax, he noticed a familiar black shape circling back toward the window. Crow landed on the windowsill, its red eyes gleaming as it stared at him. Bulldozer was confused. "Huh? Why are you back? Don't worry about me. Just go." "Give me the box," Crow said, its tone sharp and direct. "Knock, knock, knock." Not long after, Ethan heard a tapping sound on his window. He turned to look and saw Crow perched on the windowsill. But what really caught his attention was the box it was holding in its beak, a sleek, metallic container with a shiny silver finish. On its surface was a red circle with the letters GB in the center. It was the unmistakable logo of Genesis Biotech. "What's with the fancy delivery? You're bringing me gifts now?" Ethan asked lazily as he opened the window, his tone casual and amused. Crow's red eyes glinted as it dropped the box onto the windowsill. "This one's a surprise," it said. "A surprise?" Ethan was curious. What kind of surprise could it be? The box was made entirely of alloy, incredibly sturdy, but in Ethan's hands, it felt as pliable as clay. He picked it up, gave it a light tug, and the lid popped open effortlessly. Inside, his gaze fell on rows of ampoules filled with a pale blue, transparent liquid. Beside them was a stack of lab reports detailing the liquid's properties. Ethan picked up the report and skimmed through it. X-Virus. Experimental results. When injected into low-tier zombies, the X-Virus increases cellular activity, granting rapid healing abilities, heightened reflexes, and a state of hyperexcitation. It stimulates the nervous system, significantly boosting reaction speed. Zombie test subject 1. After injecting the X-Virus into a D-class zombie, its decayed body began to regenerate. Within 24 hours, the body reached peak condition, successfully merging with the virus. Zombie test subject 2. The report continued, detailing the experiments and their results. 15 trials in total, all successful, with no adverse effects on the zombies. "So, this is a zombie evolution serum," Ethan muttered, raising an eyebrow. He recalled hearing rumors about Genesis Biotech experimenting with zombies. It wasn't surprising they'd come up with something like this. It really was a surprise. Of course, with Ethan's abilities, he had no use for such low-level creations. His own healing factor was already off the charts, and more importantly, he never got injured in the first place. But these X-Virus ampoules? They could be useful for his subordinates. The report claimed that even a D-class zombie could gain enhanced healing and reflexes after injection. So, what would happen if he used it on his elite zombies? Ethan smirked. Genesis Biotech's experiments clearly weren't thorough enough. He figured he could run a few tests of his own and add some new data to the mix. "Where did you get this stuff?" he asked. "Bulldozer and I raided someone else's territory," Red-Eyed Raven replied proudly. "Not bad," Ethan praised casually before asking, "Where's Bulldozer?" "Oh, right. Bulldozer got trapped by a horde of zombies and couldn't make it back. I came to ask for backup," Red-Eyed Raven said, as if just now remembering the reason for his visit. Ethan was speechless. He'd barely complimented the guy. And now this? Bulldozer was one of his most reliable enforcers, and he'd even managed to bring back something useful. Ethan couldn't just leave him stranded. Without hesitation, Ethan issued orders to Laura and the PhD zombie. At that moment, Laura was kneeling on a rooftop, sobbing into her hands. The territory had been too peaceful lately, and she was bored out of her mind. Her heart ached for the thrill of battle. But the moment Ethan's command reached her, her wailing stopped abruptly. Her head snapped up, and a twisted grin spread across her face. He. Meanwhile, the PhD zombie was strolling down a deserted street, flanked by a procession of zombies. A few of them growled angrily, their rage palpable. Their big brother, Bulldozer, was trapped. This was unacceptable. They had to tear apart whatever stood in their way to set things right. Moments later, the zombies began to converge on the street, forming a massive horde. Their collective bloodlust filled the air, creating an oppressive atmosphere. The zombie horde was ready, a force of destruction that could shake the very foundations of the apocalyptic city. "Move out," Ethan commanded. At his signal, the zombie horde surged forward, a tidal wave of death and fury. Overhead, a single raven darted through the dim sky, leading the way. Behind it, thousands of zombies charged, their murderous intent palpable. They moved like an unstoppable flood, their presence making the entire city tremble beneath their feet. Meanwhile, Bulldozer was still hiding in a small room, his massive frame curled up awkwardly, looking pitifully dejected. "Why aren't they here yet?" Outside, the horde of zombies howled and snarled, their cries filled with mockery and menace. From the doorway, faint footsteps echoed. Peeking through a crack in the crumbling wall, Bulldozer spotted an elite zombie entering the building. Its nose twitched like a dog's, sniffing the air incessantly. This zombie wasn't particularly strong, but its sense of smell had evolved to be incredibly sharp. Following the faintest trace of scent, it was closing in on Bulldozer step by step. "What do I do now?" Scratching his head, Bulldozer realized he was about to be discovered. In such a dire situation, he had no choice but to rely on his wits. And soon enough, he came up with a plan. He could throw a rock to create a distraction and lure the zombie away. "Yeah, that's a solid plan. Who says I'm a big idiot?" Feeling quite pleased with himself, Bulldozer rummaged around with his massive hand, quickly picking up a broken brick. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it out the window. Whether the sharp-nosed zombie took the bait or not, he couldn't be sure. But the brick, flying in a perfect arc through the air, ended up smacking the towering Zombie King square on the head. Who threw that brick?" The Zombie King roared in fury, looking around wildly. One of his lackeys, who had seen everything, pointed toward the building. "Boss, the brick came from inside. There's someone in there." The Zombie King paused, his expression darkening as he pieced it together. "That bastard's hiding in the building. Get him!" Roar! Several elite zombies let out bloodthirsty howls and leapt onto the walls, scrambling toward the window. Hearing the commotion outside, Bulldozer squinted his small eyes, a faint sense of unease creeping over him. After a moment of thought, he muttered, "Did I mess up somewhere?" But before he could figure it out, terrifying zombie faces appeared at the window. They spotted Bulldozer immediately, letting out guttural roars as they lunged at him with incredible speed. At the same time, the zombie horde surrounding the building began converging on his location. Crap! Bulldozer swung his massive fist, sending one of the lunging zombies flying, then turned and bolted. As always, he relied on brute force, smashing through wall after wall in his escape. But even as he bulldozed his way through the building, He couldn't help but reflect. My plan was perfect. Bam! Just as Bulldozer smashed through another wall, a massive fist came out of nowhere and slammed into his forehead. The sheer force sent him stumbling backward, landing on the ground with a heavy thud. "You've got some nerve, throwing a brick at me." The Zombie King growled, his voice dripping with rage. Bulldozer squinted up at him, starting to piece together what had happened. The Zombie King loomed over him, radiating murderous intent. Suddenly, sharp bone spikes began sprouting from his knuckles, resembling Wolverine's claws. Bulldozer, seeing this ability for the first time, couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity. "What's this?" "Bone spurs." "Die!" The Zombie King slashed downward, the razor-sharp bone spikes slicing through the air toward Bulldozer. In the nick of time, Bulldozer raised his arm to block. But even with his thick skin and tough muscles, the spikes pierced straight through, leaving a bloody hole. That hurts!" Bulldozer yelped, stumbling backward to dodge. The Zombie King lunged forward, his bone spikes driving forward like unrelenting spears. Bulldozer barely had time to react, raising his other arm to block. But it was no use, whether he used his hands or his arms. Each desperate defense only ended with another jagged puncture. Experienced new tales on Empire. His flesh tore under the unyielding assault, fresh blood spraying with every strike. Within moments, his body was riddled with gory holes. Meanwhile, the elite zombies behind him were closing in fast, their roars echoing through the building. "Bring it on." Bulldozer's eyes turned bloodshot in an instant. His massive frame charged straight at the Zombie King, completely ignoring the pain of bone spikes piercing through his palms. He grabbed the creature's fist with a vice-like grip. The towering Zombie King, overwhelmed by Bulldozer's brute strength, was forced backward, unable to hold its ground. Boom! The two of them smashed through the last remaining outer wall and plummeted from the high-rise building. Even mid-air, they continued to grapple, claw, and pummel each other with savage ferocity. Crash! Both of them slammed into the ground with a deafening impact, causing the entire street to tremble as cracks spread across the pavement. In terms of raw power, the towering Zombie King was no match for Bulldozer. It was pinned beneath him as Bulldozer rained down heavy punches, one after another. But the moment didn't last long. A swarm of zombies on the street immediately lunged at Bulldozer, sinking their grotesque jaws into him. Roar! Bulldozer let out a pained howl, grabbing one of the zombies by the neck and hurling it far into the distance. He spun around and delivered a brutal elbow strike to another, twisting its head 360 degrees as blood spurted from its mouth and eyes. However, the Zombie King beneath him seized the opportunity. Its sharp-boned spikes shot upward, stabbing Bulldozer right in the backside. Bulldozer let out a guttural scream and leapt off in agony. But by now, his vision was filled with nothing but the grotesque faces of zombies. The horde had completely engulfed him, piling on layer after layer. The zombies' razor-sharp teeth tore in his flesh relentlessly. Pain racked his entire body. Even someone as tough as Bulldozer was on the verge of being ripped apart. Is this it? Am I really going to die here? Bulldozer thought, despair washing over him as he found himself unable to fight back. Suddenly, a sharp, eerie caw pierced the air. Caw, 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 big idiot! Big idiot! A pitch-black crow swooped down from the sky, its mournful cries echoing like the prelude to a massacre. The ground began to quake violently. It sounded like an army of thousands was charging in. Boom! 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 A suffocating pressure filled the air. One by one, the zombies piled on Bulldozer began to explode, their bodies bursting apart in a spray of blood and gore. The stench of death filled the street. What the hell is going on? Enjoy exclusive adventures from Empire. Bulldozer felt the crushing weight on his body lighten bit by bit. When the last zombie exploded into a bloody mist, his vision finally cleared. Through the haze of blood and carnage, he saw a face, handsome beyond words. Ethan stood there, dressed in a pristine white shirt, completely untouched by the blood-soaked battlefield around him. His expression was calm as he looked down at Bulldozer. "Man, you're in rough shape," Ethan remarked, his gaze sweeping over Bulldozer's battered body. Bulldozer was drenched in blood, his entire frame dyed red. His skin was riddled with bite marks and punctured by bone spikes, leaving him looking like a human pincushion. "Turning my guy into a pincushion? That's just cruel, don't you think?" "Boss!" Bulldozer's eyes welled up with tears. At that moment, Ethan felt like a divine savior, descending from the heavens to rescue him at his darkest hour. Bulldozer glanced around and noticed something strange. The two groups of zombies were now fighting each other. They clawed, bit, and gouged at one another with savage brutality. Among them, Laura moved like a phantom. Her bone claws sliced through a zombie's head, sending it flying. Her figure flickered, disappearing and reappearing in front of another zombie in the blink of an eye. With a swift motion, her claws slashed through its neck, severing its head cleanly. Laura's face twisted into a sinister grin. She was like a grim reaper on the battlefield, leaving a trail of decapitated corpses in her wake. On the other side, the PhD zombie led his own group of zombies into the fray. With each punch, he crushed a lesser zombie into pulp. Occasionally, he unleashed his psychic powers, launching devastating mental attacks on the opposing horde. The whole crew's here. If zombies could cry, Bulldozer would have been bawling his eyes out by now. Meanwhile, the Bonespike Zombie King was utterly shaken. Out of nowhere, a massive horde of zombies had surged in, swallowing up its own forces. Among them were elite zombies, moving like relentless killing machines, their savagery unmatched. And then it saw him. Amid the chaos of the zombie melee, a tall figure stood out, dressed in spotless white, his gaze cold and indifferent, fixed directly on the Bonespike Zombie King. The Zombie King couldn't sense his aura, but an inexplicable fear gripped its heart. It was a fear that came from deep within its soul. This feeling, it had only ever felt this way in the presence of its master. "You! How dare you step into our territory?" The Bonespike Zombie King roared, its voice trembling with both anger and fear. Ethan didn't even bother to respond. To him, this was just a small fry, not worth his time. With a mere thought, his domain of the dead expanded outward, spreading dozens of feet in an instant. The Bonespike Zombie King froze in place, as if submerged in a sea of blood. "Boss, let me handle this." Bulldozer suddenly sprang to his feet, as if all his wounds had stopped hurting. His eyes burned with fury as he glared at the Bonespike Zombie King, eager to settle the score for the earlier but stabbing incident. "All right, go ahead," Ethan said with a nod. With two powerful strides, Bulldozer charged forward, leaping into the air. His massive fist came crashing down, slamming the Bonespike Zombie King to the ground. He pinned it down with one hand, while his other fist repeatedly smashed into its face. Bam! 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 Each punch shook the ground, sending tremors rippling outward. Within moments, the Zombie King's head was driven deep into the earth, cracks spreading like a spiderweb around it. But Bulldozer wasn't satisfied. Grabbing the Zombie King's arm with both hands, he twisted it as if wringing out a wet towel. Crack! With a sickening sound, the Zombie King's entire arm was torn apart, flesh and blood flying everywhere, leaving its white bones exposed. "Still think you can stab me? I'll smash your ugly head and snap every last one of your bony spikes." Bulldozer muttered angrily as he continued his assault. The Bonespike Zombie King wasn't even the absolute ruler of this region, just a mid-level enforcer. Its strength was comparable to Bulldozer's, and even without Ethan's intervention, Laura and the PhD zombie could have easily taken it down. What's more, Ethan's forces had thousands of elite zombies under their command, completely overwhelming the enemy in both numbers and power. The battle was a one-sided massacre, a crushing victory. It didn't take long before the opposing zombies were completely wiped out. Corpses piled up like small mountains, and rivers of blood flowed through the streets. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay, a grotesque scene of carnage. Amid this horrifying tableau, Ethan stood untouched, his white shirt immaculate. Around him, countless zombies gathered, drawn to his presence. "Boss, this is all my fault." Bulldozer's heart was heavy with guilt. He had originally come here to hunt and redeem himself, but instead, he'd stumbled into danger and forced Ethan to personally come to his rescue. Not only had he failed to make up for his mistakes, but he'd also caused even more trouble. Ethan, however, shook his head. "You did well." "Huh?" Bulldozer was confused. He didn't know about the X-Virus, so he couldn't understand why Ethan was praising him. "I shouldn't have left the territory on my own. I caused trouble for everyone. It's all my fault," Bulldozer said, lowering his head. "It's not your fault," Ethan replied calmly. "If anything, it's mine, for having a territory that's too small." Bulldozer was stunned. His eyes grew misty again. Having a leader like Ethan, someone who took responsibility and never blamed his subordinates, was more than he could have ever hoped for. He didn't even know how to repay him. Laura tilted her head, her sharp bone claws still dripping with fresh blood. "I think you did pretty well, too. Maybe I should save you more often in the future." "No thanks." Bulldozer shook his head furiously, like a drumbeat. One rescue was enough. His but couldn't handle any more. Just then, he looked up and saw a red-eyed crow flapping its wings as it landed nearby. "Little Shadow, I owe you one too. If you hadn't called for help in time, I'd be zombie chow by now," Bulldozer said gratefully. The crow fixed its crimson eyes on him, pausing for a moment before replying in a sharp, mocking tone. "Big idiot. You're welcome." Ethan glanced around cautiously. This wasn't his territory, and there was always the chance another zombie king might show up. It wasn't a good idea to linger here. He needed to head back and focus on researching the zombie evolution serum. "Let's go. Time to head back and give you guys your shots." "Shots." At the mention of the word, Bulldozer winced, instinctively rubbing his backside. He developed a psychological trauma from all the injections he'd endured. Back at the tower, naturally, the task of administering the injections fell to the PhD zombie. During the earlier battle, some of the elite zombies had sustained injuries, flesh torn open, black blood oozing out. Since the X-Virus had regenerative properties, Ethan decided to start with them. It was also a way to reward their contributions in battle. The crate of X-Virus contained a total of 500 doses. The PhD zombie picked up a syringe, drew the serum into the barrel, and then plunged the needle into the neck of one of the injured zombies. Slowly, the pale blue liquid was injected into its body. Ethan stood by the window on the upper floor, watching the scene unfold below. The results were promising. As soon as the serum entered the zombie's system, its wounds began to heal, visibly, and at an impressive speed. "Gore!" The zombie let out a low growl, its expression tinged with excitement. The X-Virus not only healed its injuries, but also stimulated its nervous system, enhancing its reflexes. Ethan recalled the experimental reports. It would take 24 hours for the X-Virus to fully integrate with the zombie's body. By then, the effects would likely be even more pronounced. His elite zombies were already a cut above the rest. While they hadn't yet awakened special abilities, their bodies had undergone significant evolution. Sharp claws, hardened bones, heightened senses, and so on. Now, with the X-Virus injections, their strength would skyrocket. Each one of them could easily go toe-to-toe with a B-rank human awakener. These 500 zombies were the cream of the crop, the elite of the elite, a veritable zombie army. In Ethan's hands, they were a devastating weapon. Earlier today, Ethan had led his horde into another zombie king's territory, wiping out its underlings and leaving no survivors. He figured the other king wouldn't take this lying down. Zombies were naturally violent and bloodthirsty. Any zombie king who managed to carve out their own domain wasn't someone to be trifled with. Ethan was certain retaliation was coming. Meanwhile, at Genesis Biotech, the atmosphere was tense. They just received some bad news. The X-Virus they'd retrieved from headquarters had gone missing. Nathan, the person in charge, sat in his office, his expression dark and stormy. "Explain. What the hell happened? Where's the X-Virus?" "Mr. Nathan, according to satellite tracking, the plane crashed in a zombie-controlled area. one of his assistants reported. Fuck. Nathan couldn't hold back his frustration. Dropping an evolution serum into zombie territory? That was like throwing a steak to a pack of wolves. He'd initially hoped they might be able to recover it, but now it seemed like a lost cause. Any word from Maxwell and his team? No, nothing yet. Honestly, it's not looking good, the assistant replied hesitantly. Nathan mulled it over. Yeah, they were probably done for. A crash in zombie territory? There was no way they'd make it out alive. The bigger problem was that without the X virus to enhance cellular activity, they couldn't proceed with injecting the Q virus to modify bone structures. The entire zombie cultivation program was now in shambles. They'd had a complete plan for creating zombie kings, but now everything was falling apart. Which zombie king's territory did the plane crash in? Nathan asked. Based on the intel we've gathered, the zombie king in that area is extremely powerful. Rough estimates suggest it commands around 30,000 zombies. Its strength is likely on par with the zombie king in the Tower region. It's classified as a 5-star zombie nest. Damn it, the mention of the Tower region's zombie king only made Nathan angrier. The failure of Operation King Hunt had been a massive embarrassment for the company. One way or another, they'd have to take him down and restore their reputation. But now, with their zombie king cultivation program on hold, perhaps they could consider collaborating with another zombie king. And the one in the crash zone? It might just be the perfect candidate. It was strong, its territory wasn't far from the tower, and in this post-apocalyptic world, survival of the fittest was the only rule. If you didn't compete, you'd be eliminated. Chances were it also wanted to expand its domain. With a shared enemy, there was a possibility of becoming temporary allies. I think I should go have a talk with the zombie king in the crash zone, Nathan said, his expression thoughtful. His assistant immediately tried to dissuade him. Mr. Nathan, zombies are bloodthirsty by nature. If things go south, they'll kill you without hesitation. Go and negotiate with one. That's way too dangerous. True. Nathan nodded. Who knew what that zombie king was thinking? Did it even like communicating with humans? Negotiating with it would be like bargaining with a tiger. Extremely risky. So, someone else should go first to test the waters. Nathan looked up at his assistant. Stay updated with Empire. Then you go talk to it. Wah! The assistant's face instantly froze in disbelief. Night fell, and darkness blanketed the land. The city of the apocalypse was pitch black, so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. A cold night wind swept through, carrying the stench of blood and decay. The occasional roars of zombies echoed through the air. They were either fighting each other or hunting mutated beasts. Killing was everywhere, and danger lurked in every corner. Ethan, however, was holed up at home. One hand held a wine glass, which he occasionally sipped from, the crimson liquid inside glinting faintly. His other hand held a phone, and he was casually replying to messages. The faint glow of the screen illuminated his sharp, handsome features. The message was from Mia. It was short and to the point. Trade. How much do you need? Ethan typed back. Mia was slow at typing. She'd spent 10 years in a mental institution and had never gone to school. 400 pounds of flour. Do you have it? I do. Ethan's spatial storage ring contained supplies worth billions of dollars. A mere 400 pounds of flour was nothing to him. A moment later, Mia replied, All right, for crystal cores in exchange. No problem. Ethan had told her before that if she ever needed food, she could trade crystal cores with him. That's how this conversation had come about. They agreed to meet the next morning at a plaza not far from Ethan's territory. The next day, at the shelter, Mia woke up early. She lived in a large military green tent, a privilege reserved for her as the first Awakener 001. Other survivors weren't so lucky. Some lived in small, cramped tents, while others had nothing but a few sheets of newspaper to sleep on out in the open. Mia stepped outside, the bright morning sun casting a warm glow on her pale face, making her look particularly radiant. Around her, other Awakeners were busy with their tasks, some building houses, others digging tunnels. But when they saw Mia, they all greeted her warmly. Mia, is it true what you said last night? that crystal cores can be traded for food. A short, wiry young man darted in front of her, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. Mia glanced at him briefly. It's true. I'm heading out now to make the trade. Oh, the young man's curiosity only grew. Crystal cores were valuable, but without food, people would starve. Who was this person willing to trade food for crystal cores? Whoever it was must have a massive stockpile of food, right? The young man's eyes flickered with a calculating glint. He smiled slyly and said, I happen to have a crystal core on me. Can I come with you to make the trade? Mia hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right. The young man's lips curled into a barely noticeable smirk. Thank you so much, he said, his tone polite, but his eyes betrayed a hint of malice. Chapter 59, a little bonus. The short young man, named Ryan Brooks, was also an awakener. He lived in shelter number 023 and was considered quite strong. But his true identity? He was a member of the Black Hand Legion, an underground organization. His role was to infiltrate the shelter, gather intelligence, and act as a spy. The recent incidents of stolen supplies and kidnapped personnel, Ryan had played no small part in those. Now, hearing that Mia was heading out to trade supplies, he couldn't help but hatch a sinister plan. Of course, he wouldn't dare make a move against Mia herself. She was far too dangerous. But the people she was meeting? That was a different story. Ryan analyzed the situation. He figured the other side was probably just a small group or a minor organization. Soon after, Mia called Sean to join her. When Sean heard they'd be meeting Ethan, he was pretty excited. He even slicked back his greasy hair, convinced he looked incredibly handsome. The three of them left the shelter together, heading toward the designated plaza. During the walk, Ryan deliberately lagged behind, pulling out his phone to secretly message his organization. Guys, looks like we got a job. And it's a big one. Oh, what kind of big job? What's up? Did the shelter find more supplies? That big job? Or is it a pretty girl? Several members replied, curious. Ryan continued, the shelter's heading out to trade with someone. The other side has a lot of food, but I don't know who they are yet. Wait, really? If they got that much food, they must be pretty strong, right? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Still, we could scope them out first, see how strong they are, and then decide whether to make a move. Sound good. I'm in. The Black Hand Legion members quickly began organizing themselves. Ryan also sent them the location of the trade. At the plaza, Mia had chosen the plaza as the meeting spot. It was relatively clear of zombies. The fountain in the center had long since dried up. Its basin was filled with dark, congealed blood and a few skeletal remains, completely rotted away. The railings around the fountain had collapsed, and the entire area was in ruins. Ethan stood at the edge of the fountain, wearing a white shirt. His gaze was fixed on the basin, as if he were admiring the fountain from the past, back when it was still flowing with water. The plaza wasn't far from Ethan's home. Before the apocalypse, he used to take evening strolls here. The plaza had been lively back then, with vendors selling balloons and children's toys. The air had been filled with the laughter of kids. Now it was nothing but silence and death. Ethan turned around, scanning his surroundings. The towering buildings nearby were either partially collapsed or riddled with cracks. Broken windows revealed dark, gaping holes. Occasionally, the guttural growls of zombies echoed from within. At that moment, three figures appeared on the street between two crumbling buildings: Mia, Sean, and Ryan. Ryan craned his neck, squinting at the plaza. Sure enough, there was someone standing there. No way, just one person? In a world without order, anyone trading alone was practically asking to be robbed or killed. Unless their companions were hiding nearby. Ryan glanced around, scanning the area, but he couldn't find any signs of others lying in wait. You're here. As Mia approached, Ethan was the first to greet her. Mia nodded slightly. Did you bring the goods? I did. With a casual wave of his hand, Ethan summoned 4 large bags of white flour out of thin air. Each bag weighed 100 pounds, totaling 400 pounds. Enjoy new tales from Empire. Mia stepped forward, opened one of the bags, and pinched a small amount of flour between her fingers. She brought it to her nose and sniffed. Not bad. Pretty pure. Sean, standing nearby, rolled his eyes. What is this, a movie scene? You two rehearsing or something? Meanwhile, Ryan was carefully observing Ethan's every move. The way Ethan had summoned the flower out of nowhere had startled him. Could he be a spatial type awakener? Ryan silently analyzed. Spatial abilities were notoriously powerful, but not invincible. He tilted his head slightly and spotted a few figures hidden in a distant building, watching the scene unfold. The Black Hand Legion members were in position. Haha, buddy, are you really here to trade all by yourself? Ryan asked, feigning casual curiosity to confirm his suspicions. Ethan turned his gaze toward him. Yeah, just me. For some reason, the moment Ethan's eyes locked onto him, Ryan felt his heart skip a beat. A strange sense of unease crept over him, and he instinctively took half a step back. What's going on? Ryan couldn't figure it out, but he forced himself to stay calm and probe further. Do you have any more food? I'd like to trade for some too. Nope. Ethan's tone was flat. What? None left? Ryan was surprised, but quickly reasoned that Ethan was lying. If he only had 400 pounds of flour, there was no way he'd trade it for crystal cores. He's being cautious, Ryan thought. He's clearly guarding against me. But that caution might stem from insecurity. If Ethan were truly strong, he wouldn't need to be so wary. Ryan, being a skilled spy, was adept at reading people. Through subtle questioning and careful analysis, he concluded that Ethan might be someone they could take down. What Ryan didn't know was that Ethan's sharp senses had already picked up on the presence of humans hiding in the nearby building. He could smell them, and he could tell that Ryan harbored ill intentions. Sean, oblivious to the tension, grinned and asked, Ethan, it's been a while. How have you been? Not great. Pretty boring, honestly, Ethan replied casually. Even Sean, as dense as he was, didn't believe that. Boring? With all that food? Man, I'd love to be that bored. Mia stepped forward and handed Ethan 4 crystal cores. If you're free, we could team up to hunt some zombies and gather more crystal cores. You probably know some good targets, right? Not at the moment, but I might have some soon, Ethan said thoughtfully. Mia nodded. All right, let me know when you do. Sure. If you find any good targets, feel free to call me too. No problem. The group exchanged a few more words before wrapping up the conversation. Even though the plaza was free of zombies for now, it was still the apocalypse. Danger could appear at any moment, so it wasn't wise to linger. They quickly parted ways. On the way back, Mia and Sean each carried 2 bags of flour. Despite the combined weight of 200 pounds, they carried them effortlessly. We're finally going to have fresh bread again, Sean said, practically drooling at the thought. Ryan, however, grew increasingly quiet. After walking for a while, he suddenly stopped. Hey, I didn't manage to trade for any food. I'm going to check the area and see if I can scavenge some supplies. You two go on ahead. All right, go ahead, Mia said with a nod. Don't worry, I'll head back to the shelter soon, Ryan said with a faint smile before turning and disappearing into the ruins of the nearby buildings. Sean, still daydreaming about bread, wiped the drool from his mouth. But then a thought struck him. Wait a second. In a shelter, 1 crystal core is worth a whole box of instant noodles. But with Ethan, it's worth 100 pounds of flour. Isn't he losing out? Mia glanced at him, her expression calm but knowing. Don't worry, he's not losing out. I even threw in a little bonus for him. She turned her head slightly, her perfect profile catching the light. Her bright eyes lingered on the direction Ryan had disappeared into, her expression unreadable. Ethan was walking toward the building. He could already sense it. 4 human presences closing in behind him. They were leaping across the rooftops on either side, stealthily tracking him. Stop right there. Suddenly, someone landed behind Ethan, one hand on the ground to steady himself as he barked out the command. Ethan stopped in his tracks and turned around. It was Ryan. He straightened up, dusting off his hands. The expression on his face was completely different from before. Gone was the warm, friendly smile, replaced by a cold, sinister smirk, as if he were a completely different person. If you won't trade food with me, don't blame me for what happens next. Ryan's smirk deepened as he continued. Oh, And by the way, I should probably mention, I'm with the Black Hand Legion. Shoo, shoo, shoo. The other three dropped down from the rooftops, landing to Ethan's left, right, and behind him. The four of them formed a tight circle, trapping him in the middle. Spatial abilities, huh? Pretty rare. Don't let him get away, said a burly man with a booming voice. Ethan glanced at the four of them, but stayed silent. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Ha ha, sneered a wiry man with a sly grin. The Black Hand Legion had a reputation for being ruthless. To ordinary people, they were terrifying, completely lawless, and willing to do whatever they pleased. Ryan studied Ethan carefully. A spatial awakener. Huh? You've got potential. Tell you what, hand over all your food, and maybe, just maybe, I'll consider letting you join us. Continue your journey on Empire. No need. Ethan finally spoke. Oh, Ryan raised an eyebrow. Ethan didn't look scared at all. So, you're planning to fight back, huh? Don't think that just because you've got spatial abilities, we can't deal with you. Do you know why I didn't trade food with you? Ethan asked, his tone calm. What? Ryan frowned, confused. The burly man was already losing his patience. Enough talk. Let's just take him down before something goes wrong. Because, Ethan said, his voice suddenly cold, you're the food. The four of them froze, their expressions shifting. What the hell was he talking about? His words didn't make any sense. Something about him fell off. But they didn't have to wonder for long. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, like the rumble of 1,000 charging horses. The once empty street started to fill with movement. Zombies. They appeared out of nowhere, moving with terrifying speed and agility, climbing down walls, leaping from rooftops, swarming toward them. What the hell? One of the zombies, Laura, flickered like a shadow and suddenly appeared right in front of them. Another, Bulldozer, moved like a massive gorilla, bounding across the rooftops before landing with a deafening crash on a wrecked car, smashing it to pieces. Z-Zombie Horde. Ryan's face went pale as he realized what was happening. His eyes widened in shock. Where the hell did all these zombies come from? Fall back, he shouted, panic setting in. The four of them tried to retreat the way they came, but it was too late. A swarm of zombies, led by a mutated PhD zombie, had already cut off their escape route. Everywhere they looked, there were zombies. Some crouched on rooftops, others clung to walls, their glowing eyes filled with hunger. Their guttural growls and snarls echoed through the street, surrounding the group completely. This can't be happening, Ryan stammered, his voice trembling. He instinctively turned to look back at Ethan. Ethan stood there, calm and unmoving, with a sea of zombies behind him. His cold, emotionless gaze locked on Ryan. Why you're the zombie king. Ryan's voice cracked as the realization hit him like a thunderbolt. The four of them were paralyzed with fear, their hearts pounding in their chests. This is the big cat you were talking about? The burly man roared, his face twisted in rage and terror. This isn't a fish, it's a goddamn megalodon. Ryan was utterly dumbfounded. I didn't know. He couldn't wrap his head around it. The person Sean and Mia had traded food with turned out to be the zombie king. Damn it, a fool and a lunatic. Of course they'd screw things up. The zombie horde surrounded the four of them, their growls echoing like a pack of ravenous wolves ready to tear their prey apart. Among them, Bulldozer was the most excited. His small eyes squinted with glee, thinking how the boss always brought back food whenever he went out. Ha ha, this is great. Ryan, seeing the zombies closing in, panicked. As the realization of his impending death sank in, he desperately begged Ethan for mercy. Don't kill me. I can join you. Sure, Ethan said with a calm nod. You're about to become one with them. As soon as the words left his mouth, the horde roared and surged forward. These weren't ordinary zombies. They were elite ones enhanced with the X-Virus. Before Ryan and the others could even activate their Awakener abilities, they were tackled to the ground. Sharp teeth tore into flesh, and blood splattered everywhere. Ryan and his group screamed in agony, their cries echoing through the streets. But it didn't last long. Soon, their voices were drowned out by the frenzy of the zombie horde. While the horde feasted on the four, far off in the distance, a helicopter roared through the sky. Inside sat a young man, his face pale and his hands trembling. It was none other than Justin Parker, Nathan's assistant. He had been sent by his boss to negotiate with the Zombie King. Damn that boss. Damn these greedy capitalists. Justin muttered under his breath, his anxiety growing with every passing second. He stared out the window, feeling like a prisoner being marched to the gallows. Are we there yet? He asked nervously. Almost, Justin. Just past that building up ahead, replied the pilot, Mark. Oh. Justin nodded, then hesitated. How about we circle around a few more times? Mark? The helicopter was empty except for the two of them. After all, if the negotiation succeeded, great. But if it failed, bringing more people would just mean more food for the zombies. The helicopter's rotors thundered as they flew over the rooftops, officially entering the Zombie King's territory, his infamous 5-star zombie nest. Justin's palms were drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced down through the window. Below, countless zombies were stirred into a frenzy by the sound of the helicopter. Like rabid dogs, they sprinted through the streets, gathering in greater and greater numbers, snarling and chasing after the noise. Justin, we're here. Should we land? Mark asked. Land my ass. Are you trying to get us killed? Justin snapped. If they landed now, it would be a death sentence. Instead, Justin grabbed the microphone attached to the helicopter's loudspeaker and shouted, Hello. Hello. I'm from Genesis Biotech. I'm here on behalf of the company to negotiate with your boss. Hello. Can you hear me? I'm from Genesis Biotech. His voice echoed across the city, repeating several times. Justin kept his eyes glued to the scene below. After a moment, he noticed something strange. The zombies suddenly stopped. Their growls faded, and they began dispersing, retreating into the shadows. It worked, Justin muttered in disbelief. Justin, what if they're just tricking us into landing so they can eat us? Mark asked nervously. Shut up, Justin barked. The helicopter slowly descended, landing in an open plaza. Justin and Mark stepped out cautiously, glancing around. To their surprise, there weren't any zombies nearby, but standing in front of them was a single figure. It was massive, easily 6 feet tall, with rolls of fat covering its body. It looked like a sumo wrestler straight out of a video game, resembling E. Honda. Its sharp fangs gleamed in its mouth, and its small, beady eyes glinted with malice.